Hello, everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
The flea market wasn't particularly popular. It's in the big cities that a rarity can be found in the flea market. And most importantly, there are connoisseurs there. Here in a small town, such things were evaluated as junk and lame. And one could wonder what all those people live on, who on weekends stand a little aside from the general market, laying out their unpretentious goods right on the grass, on sheets of cardboard. Antique irons, those that were heated with coals, no less ancient samovars, rusted garden tools, candlesticks, interior decorations, and so on. Sometimes Victoria came to the bazaar and turned around to walk through to see what was for sale. But she was tempted only once when she saw a piece of jewelry. A tarnished brooch, once gilded, with red stones that showed other colors if the brooch was turned. It had cost a penny and was now stored in her closet. Victoria would not dare to wear it. Her classmates would curve their lips, saying it was a strange choice. This time Victoria went to the market to buy flowers. Her father allowed her to mess around in the small garden as much as she wanted. And she was not on a joke keen on making compositions. Already planted and safely wintered small thuja. And now the girl hoped to buy inexpensive roses and plant them, so to speak, in the foreground. How nice it would be to sit here in a few years, on warm summer days, and inhale the real southern flavors. Since she and her father rarely got to travel, they should turn the garden into a paradise. Victoria noticed her at once. The white box stood next to some locksmith's tools, its delicate carvings standing out against their rough texture. The girl sat down and took it in her hands. The walls of the box seemed to be a tangle of vines with skillfully carved leaves and thunderstorms, and on the lid was a picture of an eagle spreading its wings. It was made of bone, said the young salesman. He was unkemptly dressed and gave the impression of a man who could read well, if he could read. Probably travels through the villages. Old people die, hares sell their houses, and before that, vultures like this fly into the orphan huts. They buy icons, embroideries, everything unusual, original, to resell it later. Victoria did not doubt that the box is expensive. She cannot afford, but still asked not without shyness. How much is it? The uncle squinted. Will you give money? And Victoria realized it was her thing. She had long ago made it a rule. If they give her something for a price much lower than the real one, she should take it. So, fate itself wants her to own it. The girl gave 1,000, realized that this time the roses smiled at her and waved a hand, or, more precisely, a twig. But still she was going home, carrying a treasure. Whoever had carved the pattern on the box had put a lot of work into it. There are some things that seem to have a life of their own. This is one of them. From a practical point of view, the box was neither good nor bad. It was too small to hold keys, for example, and too expensive for Victoria's cheap costume jewelry, except for the brooch. At home, Victoria took out the brooch, admired the play of red stones. The shade of them was a little sinister, and put the jewelry in the box. They fit together just right. My father didn't arrive until the evening. He worked weekends too. In the kitchen, under the lid waited for them and Victoria dinner, still warm shawarma, and the girl was lying on the sofa in her room. On her stomach, covered with books, she was preparing for tomorrow's seminar. Before she washed her hands, her father looked in on her. Where are the roses? He remembered every little detail of her life, naturally, and now he expected to see newly planted bushes in the front garden. Victoria rose easily, opened the cupboard, placed a box in the palm of her hand and held it up to her father. Here, I couldn't resist. She turned her purchase this way and that, and did not immediately glance at her father. And when she finally looked to assess the impression, she almost dropped the thing. You're completely white. Are you sick? Hard? Several times in Victoria's memory, her father had complained of a stabbing pain in his side. And when she wanted to call an ambulance, he'd ask, "Let's wait a little while. Maybe it'll go away." And after a while, the pain would go away. Tony knew how much his daughter was afraid of being alone. After all, they had no one but each other. But now he'd forgotten all about it. He didn't even say Jim. He just snatched the box out of Victoria's hands. He turned it over and pressed a bulge that Victoria, if she had paid any attention to it, would have considered a detail of the pattern. And then the girl couldn't believe her eyes. The bottom of the box was another lid, which, obeying some secret mechanism, opened slightly. And when her father opened it, they both saw a small yellowed piece of paper, folded several times. Before Victoria could even blink her eyes, her father unfolded it. The girl could not imagine that rough fingers could act so quickly and yet so gently. It was as if her father had allowed the sheet to fall apart in his hands. Victoria hustled from behind his shoulder. They both saw that the sheet depicted a primitive but recognizable circus tent. And at the bottom, in oblique, flying handwriting, written in figures, the date, and the same flying signature. "Do you know what this means?" The man looked up at Victoria. The girl shrugged her shoulders in bewilderment and smiled slightly. "It means that 4 years ago your mother was still alive. I think this is the scariest place on earth," Lucy said with conviction. They lay with their heads together in their cherished place, where they would not be easily discovered. There was a stream of clear water, but the children proudly called it a river. There was a forest on all sides, and the banks of the stream were quite steep. Only here there was a sort of depression. An old tree was still standing on the edge, but its roots were already exposed, and between them the children had made a shelter, a sort of tent or cave. Tony knew Lucy had a thing for scary stories. No wonder, considering where she lived. She'd only started going to school this year, and until then she'd been homeschooled. The other kids couldn't believe it when she showed up in their class, that all these years she had lived near them, but didn't show up to class. Even though Lucy didn't look sick at all, she was just a normal girl, except prettier than the others. Immediately, she was the envy of everyone, the envy of the world. She'd shortened her school sentence by a few years. Only excellent Selena, who before the appearance of the new girl was in the class as in the fairy tale, and all the prettier, and all the smartest, hoped that Lucy was well behind everyone in her studies. It would be good that the new girl turned out to be a real Mowgli, and at her answers everyone laughed. Expectations in vain. It turned out that Lucy is successful in all subjects, and in biology and English she is a real star. Apparently, to speak in a foreign language does not give her the slightest effort. As for biology, when Lucy answered the lesson, she sometimes carried away. She went into such reasoning, which the guys could not understand, but only the teacher. "No wonder," said Austin once, smiling wistfully all the time Lucy was talking, with such a grandmother. Yes, Lucy wasn't raised by her father and mother, or even by one mother like the other kids, but by her grandmother. But the old lady wasn't easy. Not only was she a doctor with some titles and regalia, but Julia was the head of the local hospital, which was the stuff of legends and rumors. The old-timers could tell that before there were only a few buildings for tuberculosis patients, far away from the village, practically in the middle of the forest. A few local women worked there as servants. They secretly brought home bottles of fizzy, brackish calmus and clung to their places, because they were fed there and paid some allowances. In the 90s, the hospital ceased to exist, and who knows where those who were treated there were sent. A few years later, Julia and some helpers came here, and the hospital got a new life. Both buildings were renovated, and soon it became known that mentally ill people would be here. Even worse, people that nobody wanted, homeless people, marginalized people. The village was outraged, and even a movement was formed to prevent this project from materializing. It would be better to open a colony for juveniles, as they were going to do in the beginning. And the dogs, they will run away from the hospital, wander around the village, spread various diseases, or even kill someone. We wrote a letter to the region, and even to Moscow. But Julia didn't pay any attention to it, as she must have had strong patrons. None of the locals even recognized when the hospital was filled with patients. Not a single one of them had ever left the stone fence, and it would have taken a lot of effort to see anyone. Julia's employees were also exclusively her own people. She did not take any of the villagers to her, though they asked, even out of curiosity. Quite a lot of time passed, and next to the buildings began to build a whole complex of one-story guest houses, a cafe, a small pool. Even a park was laid out, and rich people began to come here. For the locals, it was like a thunderbolt. What had they forgotten here? No matter how good was the corner organized by the professor, still her patients were so wealthy that each of them could buy himself such a manor and a couple of others like it. Why don't they rest somewhere in the Maldives or Switzerland? The fog cleared a little when it became known that not just rich people come here, but those of them who have mentally ill relatives. They don't treat people abroad like that, said a lady who was bored when she came to the village. Julia is just some kind of magic. My sister hardly spoke, didn't recognize anyone, and I'm taking her away from here a normal person. Can I make an appointment? One of the locals asked ingenuously. There were some problems here too. Some people drink heavily. Some beat their wives and can't stop. And Veronica is called crazy because she throws a tantrum every 5 minutes. But Julia said it like she meant it. I must see receptions. But then how does she get all those patients? Pardon me? We didn't look good. Veronica explained to her fellow countrymen, I can't pay as much as she's asking. There's another option, to lose our minds completely and chew fence. Then we'll be just fine, but they won't put us in cottages. They'll lock us up in wards. Maybe someone will get a thicker chain and a bigger bowl. The fact that Julia had a granddaughter came out of the blue. The professor called the school principal and asked to enroll the girl in the 6th grade. The principal had no objections until it turned out that the girl had no documents other than a birth certificate. Lucy had never been to any school before. The principal was dumbfounded. But how can that be? This is the first such case. I have never encountered such a case before. Maybe the girl can't go to a regular school. She needs a special school. When Julia began to speak, her tone was such that the principal felt like a first grader herself. A few years ago, my daughter and son-in-law died tragically. Lucy is my only granddaughter, and it was hard for me to let her go. I tutored her myself. If you don't think my knowledge is enough to help her master the 5th grade curriculum, What are you? Salobazala director. You just understand. I need to formalize all this documented. I'll call the district office. Call them, Julia said. The matter was solved instantly. The principal was surprised. No obstacles, no delays. The teachers were also alert, especially the class teacher. How else would Lucy fit in? But even then, everything went smoothly. Lucy behaved just absolutely not as an upstart, not as the granddaughter of a famous person. She gave classmates cheat homework, willingly played the same games that the guys, without caprice, ate in the school canteen, ate everything to the drop. The only hobby that distinguished her from the rest of the guys was a craving for horror stories. Her imagination resembled a burning stove, and the fuel was suitable for anything from children's stories like Yellow Nightstand and Black Hand to novels by Stephen King, which Lucy read lustily. It was on this basis that she became friends with Tony. The girls in her class had very different hobbies. Lucy would bring books to the boy or retell what she had read, and he would show her the places in the neighborhood that the villagers told legends about. The two of them found this place between the roots of an old fir tree. It was summer vacation, and Tony was on his own, and Lucy was allowed to stay out until the evening. And now she was going to tell him about the scariest place on earth. Tony had heard a lot of scary stories from his friend. She told him about Dracula's castle and about the creepy Casket cave, where animals and even people were sacrificed. And then, you can imagine, Lucy was running her finger in the sand, drawing spirals in the sand. It started in the 13th century. An abbot named Henry, sent to the Holy Land by the King of Bohemia, brought back some earth from Golgotha, and he scattered it in the cemetery of his abbey. And after that, everyone who lived nearby wanted to be buried there. And then there were plague epidemics, and in the Middle Ages, people were always fighting. Anyway, as time went on, the cemetery got huge. And when the 15th century began, they built a great big beautiful cathedral and made a tomb near it. And one half-blind monk started digging up people's remains from their graves and put the bones in this tomb. Centuries later, the monastery was closed and the land was bought by a wealthy family. And the new owners hired a carver to make something beautiful out of the piles of bones. That's how they got this place called the ossuary. Can you imagine? There are whole piles of them. And even the huge chandelier that hangs from the ceiling is made of bones and skulls. Would it be hard to stay there for a night? Have you been there and seen it all yourself? Tony asked. Not, sighed Lucy. I have not been taken anywhere abroad yet. My grandmother went. She brought me all sorts of things from there, in a jewelry box made out of bone. Not human bone, of course. I don't know whose. And if you don't tell anyone, I'll. There was a pause in the air for a few moments. When did I talk too much? Tony's tone made it clear that he was about to take offense. Then I'll show you a secret tomorrow. A secret that no one will know about except you and me. And Lucy wasn't fooled. Tony usually met her near the hospital fence, and the girl didn't have the patience to wait for them to get farther away. She pulled out a small, finely carved box and held it out to her friend. Try to find the secret yourself. Tony slowly examined the thing, trying to figure out what Lucy was talking about. The unknown craftsman had taken a great deal of time in his work. Every leaf, every berry of the grape had been finished so precisely and faithfully, and the bird of prey on the lid seemed to look you right in the eye. The boy opened the box and it was empty. He shrugged and handed it to Lucy, saying, "I give up." "I didn't realize it right away either," she said consolingly. "Look." She turned the bone box over. "Here on this bunch of grapes you press, convex and..." A second lid opened and a very small space underneath. Tony was disappointed. "So what? You can't hide anything useful in here." "I can imagine," Lucy said thoughtfully, "what it's for and what's in here. Maybe some lady kept a diamond ring in here, or maybe it was a place to keep poison from others." "Is it an antique, this box?" Tony asked soberly. "Look, is there a date on it, when it was made? Maybe it was carved yesterday to sell to tourists." But Lucy shook her head with such conviction that she was sure of the mysterious fate of the box. But seeing that her friend did not share her fascination with it, she turned the conversation away and did not mention the box again. Time went on as it happens in youth. The school year seems endless, and then slam in summer vacation. And you're already in 7th, 8th, 9th grade. Those who predicted that the clinic Julia Stepanovna will not last long in the end immediately do not get rid of oncology and even do not make a new beautiful face. All these people miscalculated. No, the number of patients did not increase, but apparently those who were treated here were carefully selected not only by diagnosis, but also by income level. This was true of the cottage dwellers. It remained to be wondered why the professor, along with that, continues to keep an almshouse in the court from time to time brought various marginalized people. The village lost interest in the secluded clinic next door, neither to get a job there, nor in patronage professor was not seen. It was hoped that she would allocate some money for the common good while there. The House of Culture will help to repair or gifts to school children for the new year will buy. But when it was delicately hinted at, Julia said that all the income of the clinic to a penny go to scientific development, so no charity. And over time, the village as if crossed out the unfriendly neighbor from his life. Let her do whatever she wants with her psychos. Well, at least it's not a metallurgical plant. It doesn't poison the nature. Let him do what he wants. Lucy was still first in her biology class, and she had fewer and fewer free minutes. Her grandmother involved her in her work, and to all appearances, was preparing to make her successor. The adult teachers and some of her parents thought that Lucy's future was assured. Only Tony knew that the girl didn't feel happy. "Grandma decided everything for me," said Lucy gloomily. She herself, "You know, how many things in life has seen. And I will have to sit here without a word, graduate from the institute by correspondence, and then work for her. And I can't argue at all. I think Grandma treats me like one of her patients. And you know, there are some creepy characters in there." "Like what?" Tony put Lucy's bag in his other hand. He'd meet her at the hospital gate and walk her back after school. He had to make a decent circle to do that, but they had no other opportunity to socialize. Lucy's time was packed to the minute. "They're the kind that Grandma kept locked up at first and then let out, and I guess we'll have them forever now. Good people. Let's say Grandma has a helper. I don't know what his name really is. If I ask Grandma, she'll definitely ask, 'Why?' I nicknamed him Carl myself. I read that it's a dark name. It's like the cry of a crow. Tony, that's not a man. That's a closet with a beard. He's probably over 6 feet tall. What's he doing here? What do you need him for?" "Well, he's a janitor. He's a watchman. At night, he sleeps in this booth by the gate. Honestly, if I ever want to get out at night, I'd rather climb the fence than pass him, and he's got a dog too. What kind of dog? Tony interrupted. He was a dog person. I don't know. Looks like a fat dog with floppy ears. But purebred, of course. His grandmother brought him a puppy. And the other one we have is Jessica. She's a normal aunt. She's cool. She used to be locked up too. Then they let her out, I think, because they couldn't keep her in there any longer. She'd die. She's skinny. You can't imagine. Just bones. She looks like a ballerina. And she has visions. At first I thought she was crazy, like those psychic victims. You know, the ones who mumble. In the ocean sea, on the island of Bayan, there's a board. Under the board, there's a longing. Tony couldn't take it any longer and laughed out loud. No, Lucy grabbed his arm. She's already predicted a couple of times accurately. She told one of my grandmother's patients that it was a waste of time to treat her, that you wouldn't live to see the fall anyway. And sure enough, at the end of August, they called her grandmother to tell her she was dead. Something happened to a blood clot. The second time we had such an open dining room, when it was warm, everyone liked to gather there. And this aunt was drinking tea and thoughtfully said, "Tomorrow it won't be like this." And in the night there was a fire and the canteen burned down. Maybe she set the fire. No, there was a wooden cook's house next to it. The wiring short-circuited and the house caught fire and the canteen caught fire from it. But you know what's really creepy? You can see Jessica where she's not. How's that? Tony even stopped. I saw her in my room once, Lucy said firmly, knowing Tony had no reason not to believe her. He believed her always, even knowing what a fertile imagination she had. You imagine. It's night. I'm asleep, of course. The window is closed, the door, of course. Grandma's strict about that. She taught me from childhood to lock the door. Like, we have a lot of people living here, and they're different. Suddenly, I wake up in my sleep with some kind of fear, the feeling that there's someone in the room. And there's Jessica in the darkest corner, sitting in a chair. She's got her leg up, in her long skirt, sleeved sweatshirt. She always dresses like that so it won't show how skinny she is. I sat down, crumpling the sheet, so scared. I don't know how to protect myself from her. And she says to me, "Get out of here." And I realize it can't be, but it is. Tony looked at his friend with sympathy. He didn't believe her 100%. It was unbelievable, but Lucy told him about what had caused her anguish, and he couldn't help feeling sorry for her. So there we are, me and Jessica talking. She's a pretty normal lady, though. And the next day, I tell her how she came to see me at night. And she looks me in the eye and says, "I told you the truth. Lucy, let's really go." It was the push of fate Tony's been waiting for. We have one last year of school left, and fuck it. We're going away to college. We're adults. It doesn't matter if they let you go or not. When you're 18, you can decide for yourself. I didn't mean it that way, of course, but basically, you marry me. And then you're my responsibility, not grandma's. His heart had never beat so much as it did in those moments when he waited for the answer to that question. But Lucy didn't even seem to notice him. It was as if she was treating their marriage as if it were a natural, settled matter. She only sighed. "I'll talk to grandmother." But the look on her face and her shifting eyebrows said that she didn't expect anything good to come of that conversation. The entire 11th grade passed under the sign that Lucy was going to tell Julia about her decision and chickened out at the last minute. When the conversation finally took place, there was a storm like Lucy had never remembered in her entire life. At first, Julia cut her off simply. "No, it's impossible." "Why not?" Lucy knew of her grandmother's temper, and to the last tried to cause outbursts. "I love Tony. I don't need anyone else. What's so strange about us getting married? And I want to go to school full-time too. We'll go away. Then maybe I'll come back. Maybe even. You will not marry anyone, and you will work here." Grandmother spoke in such a tone, as if Lucy was a puppy, to which the mistress tried to convey the simple truth that you cannot sleep on the bed and make puddles on the floor. There are special places for that. The girl had absorbed the rules of the house, but then her eyes widened. "How can you imagine it? How can you forbid me to marry? You don't know what you're asking." Lucy was frightened by Julia's tone. "Remember your favorite fairy tale about the mermaid? That's like the Little Mermaid saying, 'I want to live on the beach.' And who are you in that fairy tale?" Lucy squinted. good grandmother, or sea witch. You'll be driven to and from school now. At that moment, the girl thought Julia hated her. You won't have the key to the gate anymore. Not only will you no longer have Tony in your life, but you will no longer have an institution. And if you object and complain, you'll go to the court, to jail. Lucy sank to the bed. Many things in her life really changed after this conversation. She could only talk to Tony during recess, and by the time school was over, Lucy had a car waiting for her. And she couldn't complain to the teacher, the principal, or anyone else, as Tony had advised. Even if it was decided to take her away from her grandmother, and this was not a fact, the case would drag on for a long time. And grandmother will not allow Lucy to be sent to a boarding school. Rather, really will attribute to her some mental diagnosis and ban her from the ward. The only thing left to do was to grit her teeth and wait for graduation. And then we'll see, Lucy told herself. Her grandmother didn't even allow her to go to the graduation, no matter what her granddaughter might do there. Julia got Lucy's diploma in advance. The girl did not talk about leaving, nor about the institute. It seemed she reconciled. But a week after graduation, Lucy escaped through a window at night. The clinic was securely walled, and the girl remembered the alarm system. How long had she been racking her brains over how to get out of here? The only option she and Tony could think of was to go down to the beach, swim across the shallow river, and on the other side Lucy would be waiting for Tony with dry clothes. They would catch the first train, and in 2 hours they would be in town. Lucy was so afraid that she would be found there, that her conspiracy had gone beyond all mental limits. And there we must take the train, and then on, she said, maybe somewhere in the capital. We'll get lost there for sure. Come on, Tony looked at her with love and pity. Don't make a Sherlock Holmes out of an old woman. She'll have her little tantrum and then she'll move on. Let her go on living with her nutters. But Lucy shook her head gloomily. There are dreams in life which come back again and again. And so Lucy dreamed of escape night after night. The grounds of the asylum were always well lit, except in certain corners. So those who worked here carried flashlights. But this way to the river, which the girl made in total darkness, this cold black water. Lucy was a good swimmer, but she often imagined something scary. It was not the current that frightened her, not the whirlpools, but both that took lives every year on this river. It was the fear that someone would grab her and pull her under the water. And many times Tony had to wake her friend at night when Lucy screamed not in her own voice, but in a strangled voice. Meanwhile, their escape went quite well, and 2 hours after the shivering Lucy came out of the water, they were already sitting in the train. The girl's hair had not yet had time to dry. They had no difficulty in renting an apartment in the city, to the lamentations of Lucy, who demanded to go even farther away, or better still, to Kamchatka or Sakhalin. Here is such a good university, gently persuaded her friend Tony. If we both get in, well, what will your grandmother be able to take you away? It's ridiculous to even think about. You're an adult. You make all the decisions about your life on your own. Still, until the list of those who were accepted to the first year were published, Lucy tried not to go outside and asked Tony to ring the doorbell 3 times so that she would open it for him at once. The boy laughed at her, but thought to himself how deceptive the impression was. To everyone and always, Lucy's family seemed more than prosperous. A loving grandmother and a quiet, well-meaning granddaughter, an excellent student, but to what extent the girl's will was broken. To the great joy of young people, they both entered, and Lucy chose not the biology department, which she was predicted by her grandmother, and together with Tony submitted documents for the faculty of history. When they became students, they signed, although the dean grumbled. A married student is not a student at all. They didn't have money for even the most modest wedding, but they were given a room in a dormitory on the 2nd floor, where married couples lived. The fee was symbolic. In fact, this is what prompted the guys to formalize their relationship so quickly. It was a time in their lives when they saved money on everything. Lucy did not immediately believe that they had begun a normal student life, with lectures and seminars, with trips to the movies and excursions, and even with the annual winter ball, which was held in the atrium. Girls had to come in long ball gowns, and for some reason, almost all the girls wore brides' dresses. Perhaps they seemed most like the old ones, with their crinolines and plumes. Lucy had borrowed one too, and she looked at herself in the mirror with delight. So it was my fate to wear it anyway, she repeated. I didn't have to go to the wedding, so at least now. Although studying was difficult compared to school, the time passed. Especially the sessions flew by in a flash. Tony and Lucy sat over the notes far past midnight. Good grades, on which depended the scholarship, were vital to them. After a little bit of studying, both of them started to work part-time. Tony took a part-time job as a janitor in a kindergarten, and Lucy was hired as a waitress in a cafe for 4 hours a day. In her senior year, Lucy got pregnant. They hadn't dreamed of having a baby yet. That is, they thought that it would be, of course, but a little later. However, when the doctor confirmed the hunch, both Tony and Lucy took it as some kind of miracle that had come into their lives. Tony insisted that Lucy quit her job and that he would provide for the family. All she had to do was attend lectures and write notes for both of them. They defended their diplomas, and only then Lucy believed that the old life would not return. By then, Tony's grandmother had died, leaving her grandson a house. Tony traveled to the village, sold the inheritance, and the young couple was able to buy a small apartment in the city. Both of them did not even think about renovation, which nowadays becomes the purpose of life and a work of art. They whitewashed the ceilings, pasted fresh wallpaper. They bought the most necessary furniture on Avito, including a crib, and felt as rich as Croesus. Almost all of Tony's time was occupied by work, and at night he often wrote term papers in theses, which also gave the young family some money. Tony wanted to pay for Lucy's hospitalization. His mother lost her firstborn child because she was overlooked by the doctors, and Tony wanted to do his best to make sure that nothing like that happened to his wife. The girl was born on the last day of summer, so quiet and warm, as if grace was pouring from the sky. From the doctor's point of view, everything went normally and without peculiarities, although Lucy's own labor, of course, was not given easily. She had to get stitches, and the weakness of the young woman felt incomparable, and she was pitied. Under the conditions, Lucy was supposed to be in the same room with the baby, but seeing that the woman in labor cannot really rise in bed, the doctor told her, "Get some rest, get some sleep tonight. And your daughter, what did you call her, Victoria? Will stay in the pediatric ward with the other babies. We'll bring her back in the morning to feed her." Lucy tried to protest, but she could see she was dead tired, just falling asleep. It was the most blissful day of her life. She realized that all the terrible things were over, that she had a healthy, strong girl. True, Lucy had not yet seen her, but the nurses said that the girl was beautiful. Lucy went to sleep and woke up. She had gotten flowers from Tony, and dinner was delicious, and Lucy hoped her strength would return to her quickly. That night she slept soundly, as she had when she was a child, and woke up just as suddenly. It was the second hour of the night. The windows of the maternity hospital overlooked the forest. It was, as they say now, the thing of the hospital town. The doctors were proud of the fact that the air here is the cleanest, and patients have the opportunity to walk along the forest paths. But the lanterns in the forest were not lit. Nothing lit up the room, and in the farthest, darkest corner, a woman sat on a chair meant for visitors. Lucy's hair began to lift on her head. She recognized the visitor. Loose pants and a long-sleeved blouse. Jessica didn't seem to have aged. Her hands were clasped in her lap, and Lucy almost cried out when the stone in the ring glittered slightly on her finger. The dream couldn't be this vivid, so real. Lucy bit her lip, trying at the same time to keep from screaming and hurting herself, hoping she would still wake up. "Get out of here," Jessica said. The words were the same as last time, almost, except she didn't say, "Go away." She said, "Leave." Lucy finally figured out to light the flashlight on her phone. She couldn't turn on the overhead light. The switch was far away where the scary guest sat. The flashlight flashed on, and Lucy had time to think that she would just die on the spot if Jessica really had come here and was sitting in her room. She wasn't stopped by the guard at the entrance or the nurse on duty. But there was no one in the corner, only a nightstand on which stood a carafe of water and an empty oilcloth chair. Lucy clenched her hands. If this wasn't a bad dream, what was it? A hallucination? Was she going crazy too, like Grandma's patients? Tony had explained to her 100 times that it was all in the past, that grandma had found her leaving school note and had accepted it. Otherwise, she would have found the recalcitrant granddaughter long ago and tried to get her back. Time has passed. There was no way the tentacles of the past could reach back to today. Lucy wanted to go to the pediatric ward, pick up her daughter and keep her close to her, and tomorrow ask the doctor to get them out of the hospital as soon as possible. At home, where it was up to her to open the door or not to open it, she felt more confident. She had to make a tremendous effort to abandon the plan. She went back to bed, covered herself with a blanket, as she had done when she was a child, when she had made herself a house and hid in it from the horrors of the books she had read. But the bed was so warm and Lucy's strength was so little that she still fell asleep and woke up again at dawn. The maternity ward also wakes up early. By 6 o'clock, the midwives on duty were already delivering babies to their mothers, and Lucy was waiting for the opportunity to have a good look at her daughter. They say girls look like their fathers. But time after time, there were sounds of a cart carrying newborns. Here they called it the musobos because the hungry babies were screaming. But no one opened the door to Lucy's room. Finally, silence came and still no baby was brought to her. Lucy got up with difficulty and, leaving her slippers under the bed, slipped barefoot to the door. The hospital had a life of its own. The children were being fed and the only people in the corridor were the medics hurrying about their business. "What about my baby?" Lucy asked the first girl in a white coat. "Why didn't they bring it to me?" The nurse twitched her shoulder. "I don't know. Are you from the pay ward? The baby should be with you. Or does he have some kind of medical problem? Usually the weaker ones are monitored." Lucy hurriedly explained why her daughter was in the pediatric ward. "Well, not there, asked," the nurse said. Yesterday's nurses had already changed, and the ones who took over could not understand Lucy. "In paid wards, children are always with their mothers." "I don't have anyone." Lucy's voice broke. "You have my daughter." Then the nurse's expression became confused. "We have no one. All the newborns have been delivered to their mothers." Lucy grabbed her hair and sobbed. She slid down the wall, squatted, cried, and couldn't stop. She realized that she was acting shamefully, that it was probably hormones. She had to restrain herself. Nothing terrible could happen. Her daughter would be found. But she couldn't stop herself. She heard quick footsteps. She was handed a glass of very cold water. It must have come straight from the tap in a hurry. There was a commotion. An elderly nurse kept a close watch on Lucy. "Now they will find your girl," she said good-naturedly. "The other day we had a mix-up of children during feeding. A mom takes her daughter and her eyebrows grew overnight." She screamed. "Not mine. They gave her girl to another woman who was lying by the window." Oh, it was a laugh, how they were changing. The nurse herself laughed, remembering, but Lucy didn't get it all very well. And finally her heart broke when she saw that the head of the maternity hospital, the doctor on duty, and the head nurse were hurrying down the corridor to her. Apparently, they did not want anyone else to see the scene. And the head of the hospital, Nellie, hooked Lucy under the elbow. "Let's go to my office and talk." "Did they find her?" Lucy almost shrieked. "Come on, we'll get to the bottom of this." When a sobbing Lucy sat down in Stono's office near her desk, she noticed that the head nurse was leaning against the door to prevent anyone from entering. The superintendent turned off the desk lamp that had become redundant. "The baby was supposed to be with you." "Was she?" she said separately, suggestively. "Why are you telling me all this? I begged you yesterday to let my daughter be with me." "I was refused. She was taken away." "Are you sure you remember her being taken away?" As distraught as Lucy was, she realized it would have been easier for the staff if the baby had gone missing from the ward where she was with her mother, not from the children's ward where he was in the care of the medics. Of course, the hospital's still to blame, but what about the mother? "Victoria wasn't even brought to my room," Lucy said, calling her daughter for the first time by the name she and Tony had chosen for her. "You never found her, did you?" "There's a guard coming up," Stone said. "He's already changed, but he hasn't left yet." "Don't you have security cameras?" "They don't give us any money for them," the manager said dryly. The guard was an elderly, gray-haired man of small stature. He just threw up his hands. "I didn't go away. I didn't see the child taken out." "Could someone have come in through the service entrance?" Lucy asked that question. In addition to the main entrance, There was a service door near the stairs. From the inside, it was locked with a hook. The girls who were in the maternity ward knew about it and sometimes ran away for an hour or two to see their friends, to take a walk in the woods, or even to go home to wash and visit the older children. The headmistress raised her eyebrows and hurried the guard to answer. Well, I'm not going to be able to keep an eye on the whole building. I've been sitting in my room, walked down the hall from time to time. I didn't hear anything. It was quiet. You've checked everything, right? The superintendent asked the head nurse. Everything, she sighed. Well, we must call the police, and Nellie Alexandrovna took up the phone. Lucy didn't remember how she got to her room. Then Tony arrived, having barely waited until morning. Lucy had promised to show him her daughter, but he saw his wife and didn't recognize her. Lucy's face was so dead. Tony, I know who stole her, she said. No, they weren't left alone with the trouble. Lucy's room became a thoroughfare. The police came by. They even found a psychologist somewhere. She was a full-figured woman who looked like an old gypsy. True, her searing black hair was cut fashionably, but the gold earrings in her ears, but the bright makeup and the strong smell of perfume were so out of harmony with what her parents were feeling right now that Lucy just clasped her hands to her chest pleadingly. Go away, please. For the first 2 nights, she and Tony stayed awake, waiting every minute for news. Never before had Lucy been interested in the disappearance of children. But in any case, what had happened to them was out of the ordinary. It happened that negligent mothers left their children unsupervised and they disappeared. It was much more common with older children. Some were lost, some were victimized. More than once these days, Lucy had caught the superintendent's eyes both sympathetic and irritated. So much trouble for her girl. There was a good chance the headmistress would be fired. No, she could only keep her place by a miracle. And Nellie Alexandrovna thought now about how to fight back, how to explain what happened, and not to remain at fault. They allocate only a little money for security. That's why the guard is a pensioner and there are no surveillance cameras. Nellie Alexandrovna was preparing to fight on all fronts. Her dream was to retire from here in a year and a half, and until then to remain the head of the school. Lucy she hurriedly discharged while the young woman stayed here. The maternity hospital resembled a hive. Not only were there police and journalists, but the women who had intended to give birth here for a fee were ready to reconsider if their babies were kidnapped. Tony asked the police to help him take Lucy home so that there would be no prying eyes, no questions, and above all, no press. But the investigating officer, Christina, said it couldn't be avoided. You can't turn off the phones. We have to stay in touch. And now, when there will be announcements in newspapers, on radio, on television, those who may have seen something will try to contact you. Christina was a young girl. There may have been several investigators on the case, but they communicated mostly with Christina. The police must have thought it would be easier for Lucy and Tony to get along with someone who was practically the same age as them. Lucy immediately said that her grandmother was involved in the kidnapping. No one else could have done it. She squeezed Christina's fingers with such force that she thought, this is going to leave bruises. We'll check it out, of course. Christina tried to free her hand, but let's not stop at just that theory. If you think about it, why would an old woman have a baby? Just to get back at you? I'm sorry, I find that hard to believe. It's too illogical. Send someone down there. Right now, Lucy was ready to get down on her knees. Christina nodded and promised that the police would go to the village today. And tomorrow I'll tell you all about it. But Lucy couldn't wait until the next morning. She called the investigator in the evening. You see, I told you. You hoped in vain that everything was so simple. Christine's voice was tired. The clinic has long been closed, or rather, it's a recreation center now. Your grandmother left a long time ago. We haven't found out where. She's definitely not registered in the region. There's almost zero chance that she did it. But then who did? Lucy's blurted out. Let's check the mothers who've recently lost a child. Maybe one of them had a mental breakdown. Rich childless couples. Maybe one of them had a baby. Well, I don't know, Christina admitted. It's so rare. Don't despair. We'll keep looking. We'll keep looking, Lucy repeated, dropping the phone. She hadn't told the police anything about what could be called her night vision. Who would have believed her? After such a confession, everyone would just assume that she'd had a mental breakdown too. But Tony knew. He brought Lucy some tea and said firmly, suggestively, "Grandma, we'll find her." The day after the young woman was discharged, Tony's parents came to visit. They had called ahead of time, and Tony led them past those who besieged their entryway with journalists and mere curiosity. All Lucy heard was the sound of voices coming through the open door. Then the door slammed shut, and the noise died down with it. She felt very ill. She had been given a special injection in medication, but the robe around her chest was soaked with milk. It was logical to think that whoever had stolen the baby would take care of her. But Lucy had a feeling that her daughter was all alone, helpless, alone with the whole world. Would she survive this night? And the next? Such thoughts were maddening. Tony's parents confirmed what the police said. Yes, we didn't want to say before. The mother had a guilty look on her face. "You're so sensitive about your grandmother." No, there was nothing sudden. Patients would finish their treatment and leave, and no new ones would take their place. That's all. Then it just kind of emptied out quietly. The guard told those who hung around that the clinic was closed. "When was that, Mom?" Tony asked. The woman arched her eyebrows. 2 years ago, I think. Right, Talia?" "Yes, 2 years." "So did they close or did they move?" Lucy's throat kept drying up and her voice trailed off. Her mother made a helpless shrug. I don't know. So are they looking or are they fooling around?" Father couldn't stand it. "Maybe they're waiting for you to give them money so they can start scratching." "Dad, what are you talking about? As long as you're sitting here, waiting silently, nothing will move. We have to sue the hospital first. Then declare that now not only local, but journalists from the center will come here." Lucy wrinkled as if from unbearable pain, took her fingers on her temples, went into the bedroom and fell down on the bed. "Shut up, Tony's mother stood up. "It's the boy's grief first and foremost. Let them decide what to do. I'm gonna go comfort the girl." The next few days dragged on for an agonizingly long time. Everyone at home was confused about the time. Was it morning or was it afternoon? The hours when there was no news were particularly frightening. The phone calls were now answered by his father. Tony wouldn't get up from his computer, telling no one what he was looking up on the internet. The mother was crying quietly and kept trying to feed or at least get Lucy out of her stupor. And the young woman seemed immersed in herself and as if she was painfully remembering something. There was news after all. Christine accepted the fact that Tony's parents would be aware of the search. "Just please, no contact with the press," she asked. "Otherwise, any lead could easily be destroyed." There was a vagrant who was seen somewhere, her beggarly clothes ill-matched to the smart blanket of the baby she was carrying. One influential couple was urgently flown abroad with a small child in her arms. Another woman with an unstable psyche, who had a mania for having a daughter, refused to open the door to the police. Tony's father was about to attack the investigator with reproaches, but Christina's tone suddenly became ironclad. "Anatoly Dmitrievich, your irritation will not help to find your granddaughter. If you cannot give us any threat in this search, do not interfere. Otherwise, I will call the parents to me and report the information only to them." A week had passed. It was late at night. The parents were asleep. Lucy was crying so quietly that no one could hear her, but her nose was stuffy and she couldn't breathe. At that moment, Tony sat on the edge of her bed. He looked into his wife's face and saw the glint in her eyes. "You awake? Come on, I need to talk to you." He led his wife into the kitchen and closed the door behind him. On the table was the laptop that Tony didn't seem to have turned off all these days. "Look what I found," he said. "It's kind of just a forum post, but..." Lucy brought her face close to the screen. She had been crying so much lately that her eyes were swollen shut, and she couldn't even see as clearly anymore. "I'm so glad," wrote the woman with the nickname World. "About Mom, all the doctors said the same thing, that she will soon stop recognizing loved ones. The disease is progressive, it can only be delayed. But this year we spent 4 months in the clinic, and you should have seen it. It's like my mom started from scratch. She forgot all of us. I had to remind her that I was her daughter. Here was her husband and so on. But now she's thinking and reasoning like a perfectly healthy person. Girls, don't ask where we've been. They don't take people there from the street anyway. Lucy looked up. You think? Maybe, Tony said cautiously. But see, it's not like she's saying where it is. You scroll further, there are girls there. She did promote it. It was necessary to look through several pages of the forum before an unknown geographical name caught Lucy's eye. Where is it? She asked, perplexed. Here begins the most interesting thing. Tony sat on the edge of the chair. So listen and try to compare everything. Shall I make you some coffee? Put the kettle on. Lucy felt the urge stirring in her for the first time in a long time. She wanted to drink strong, sweet coffee with cream. So, there is a certain conditional peninsula. Tony put the kettle on the fire, by the way, not so far from us, less than 1,000 kilometers. A place, as they say, quite popular in a small circle. There's a big lake there, quite cold, but a meteorite fell there a long time ago. Of course, there are those who are interested. Besides, the peninsula itself is curious. There's only one road to get there, and it's quite narrow. There are forests on the right and swampy terrain on the left. But these swamps have not been there for centuries. Where it's drier, you find the remains of ancient settlements. Well, the forest is quite inhabited, you can hunt, and fishing on the lake is very good. If a person wants to live there in seclusion, it can be done quite well. And in the 19th century, a guy thought of it. He built himself a mansion, not such, of course, as today on Rublevka, but still. And this comrade was also fond of various nuances connected with psyche. He even did some experiments, they say. He died, if I'm not mistaken, before the revolution. But the house he built was so good that it has survived to this day. There were different offices in it at different times, but it was very inconvenient to go there. A few years ago, a businessman bought the house and rented the peninsula for a quarter of a century. He planned to make a paradise for tourists there. You know, fishing, cabins, a bathhouse, hunting, shashliks. Because if anyone had gone there before, the enthusiasts who are said to be a bit crazy. Somebody was scuba diving there, wanted to find a meteorite. Somebody said that there was a place of power and almost danced with a tambourine. Somebody was interested in ancient sites. But the businessman didn't have time to turn anything around. He had it all sort of rebought. The kettle made a sound like the cry of a cat whose tail had been stepped on. Tony turned it off, poured a scoop of instant Nescafe coffee into the cups, took the cream out of the refrigerator. And that clinic is there now, he said. I've been trying to find pictures of it. People take pictures of everything now, every sneeze. I was hoping for a glimpse. On social networks, on forums, but there's nothing. No, of course, former photos of this place can be found, but not fresh, not current. Rika, why are you looking at me like that? I'm going there because it's a real lead. Here we are tormented by some small news every day, and everything passes by. I just can't imagine how you can carry a child and take it so far away. In a car. Yes, Lucy said bitterly, I'll go with you. You won't, Tony shook his head. First of all, you're not strong enough. You're dizzy several times a day. Second of all, nobody's gonna let either of us go. Christina needs us every now and then, and Dad and Mom will revolt. I can say I have work to do. You just don't understand, Lucy said. I'm like an entrance ticket. You can't get anywhere near there without me. And you didn't believe me yet? Andrew, with me some strange things are happening these days. Here you just showed that woman writes, as if her mom's memory was erased. And I feel like I've had my memory wiped, and then I've had it all written over again. But now, maybe from the stress, something's coming through. It's really hard. My head hurts. It's like I'm going to some great depth, and I can see something. It's foggy, like it's not real. But it's not a dream. It's not a glitch. It's a memory coming back. I'm going crazy with all this. Then suddenly she's worried about the gun. It was Lucy, who always said to herself that her hands were hooks, and who cut herself in the kitchen so often that a Band-Aid was always in the cabinet, next to the stock of grits, and couldn't we at least buy a trauma gun? She asked her husband, naively believing that he would know what he was talking about. Are you saying you can shoot someone? I'm not talking about people. I'm talking about dogs. When I lived with my grandmother and she had that sidekick, the recovering psycho. Remember? I do. Carl. He had these special breed of dogs that they brought in from far away. They were trained specifically for humans. Tracking, fighting. They used to search for slaves with them. And sometimes they give the command to hunt us to death. I don't want to kill dogs either, but I'd like to stop them. Lucy, you're not. You're going. Now I'll look up the best way to get there and book us tickets. The young woman reached for her laptop. Tony held it down with both hands. Do you realize this might not be the same thing at all, a false trail? We'll arrive and there'll be some local doctor, Ivan Ivanovich. In the meantime, we'll be wanted here. Everyone's nervous, even that investigator. If it's all bullshit, we'll lose 3 or 4 days. But at least we'll do something. Are you out of your mind? Lucy clenched her fingers, every phone call, every knock on the door. Tony was going to say maybe Lucy should take some medication for a while, strong enough to sleep so she couldn't hear, till he could run back and forth, but he didn't have the heart to say it. Meanwhile, Lucy took possession of the laptop. Look, we can take the train almost all the way to this place. Look for a hotel there. Tony said in surrender, if your grandmother is in charge of the clinic, it's unlikely she'll let us stay overnight. The hardest part was convincing Tony's parents that the trip was necessary and that Tony and Lucy would go no matter what it cost them. Lucy was increasingly silent, Tony said. We don't want to lie to you that we're off to a friend's house or a country house, like we're hiding from the press or something, and we don't want you to worry about us. Tickets for tomorrow. Grab the side seat. We'll be back no later than Friday. What makes you think Granny had anything to do with it? Tony's father tried to appeal to their reason. Do you realize how it looks from the outside? Nowadays, if young people try to give grandma's babies to have a day out, the old ladies are ready to cry by nightfall. And this grandmother still lives far away. Don't go crazy. Rit, maybe you need some shots, I understand. As a mother, it's harder for you than it is for all of us. When we come back, Lucy licked her lips. I agreed to be injected, locked in a cage. Just let us go now. And the now was so strong that Tony's father was silent and waved his hand, and his mother was anxious to pack food for the journey. The next day she clapped around, showing Lucy what and where to put the eggs, the pickles, the lamb, and the young woman was a little distracted. No news came in. Christina promised to call as soon as there was any new lead, but the phone was silent. In any other situation, they would have dialed the investigator's number themselves in the morning and evening to see if there was any news. But now it didn't even cross Lucy's mind, as if she'd been promised something there, at the unknown lake where the meteorite had fallen. It was raining when they left. They were lucky there was no one in the stairwell. There were 2 guys with cameras in the entryway, but Lucy was wearing a hooded cloak, and Tony was so quick to get his wipe past the reporters and open the door for her that the guys smoked and continued to smoke without even taking their eyes off her. It was the middle of September, and it was getting dark much earlier than in summer. Already at dusk, they hurried along the train, trying to find their car. The train had been standing for 10 minutes. The elderly conductor only glanced at their tickets. Hurry up, we're leaving now. Lucy couldn't remember the last time she'd been on a train. For some reason, the narrow aisle, the laundry hanging from the shelves, and the low lighting gave her an eerie impression. Their seats stood out in bright blue paneling, and the shelves were not yet made up, but someone's bags were crowded under the table. Lucy looked questioningly at Tony, saying, "Did you get the wrong seats?" "Oh, I put in, I'm sorry." The heavy woman who sat opposite in the compartment looked at them begrudgingly. "I thought no one would sit down. I have a lot of things. Maybe you'll let them stay here. I see you've only got 1 purse. Unless you're gonna get us up in the middle of the night to pick them up." No, I'm going to." And the lady said the same place they were going to. "Can I lie down upstairs?" Lucy asked her husband. "I want to get away from it all. I'll turn my back to the window and lie down." "Wait, you have to drink tea first." "Sure. Was it for nothing that Mom collected all this for us? We don't know how much strength we'll need, and you're just eyes and a nose." The tea was historical, that is, exactly as it used to be served in cut glasses with cup holders. The iron handles burned my fingers. It was dark outside the window, and it was only just visible that it was raining. Lucy put her fingers to her lips. "Did you burn yourself?" "No. I remember something. It's like it's all there. But no way. Tony, I better lie down." They made the beds, and Lucy climbed up easily, turned her back to the wall. The train was going very fast, flying. Maybe it was late and catching up. The carriage shook jerkily, and Lucy saw herself on a train like this, in a parverside cabin. Across from her at the table sat a very young woman, very tan, blonde hair braided into African pigtails, and the ends were dyed pink. The woman is wearing a denim jacket, deliberately torn. There are a lot of rings on her fingers. On the table in front of them is a bottle of beer and smoked fish. It smells so good that little Lucy can't stand it. She holds out her hand. "May I?" "Just a little bit, or you'll be thirsty later." And there's a line for the bathroom. Is that woman her mom? But Lucy had absolutely no memory of her parents. Her grandmother didn't show her any pictures. It hurts too much to see them, you know. I've locked those memories away. What on earth was going on? Lucy wrapped her arms around her elbows. She'd hoped that maybe when she fell asleep she would see another piece of the past. Where was it all lurking? Why had it come now? But she fell asleep unexpectedly soundly, dreamless, for the first time in many days. Asterisk, asterisk. In the morning, when they got off at an unfamiliar station, the aunt whose things they had agreed to shelter under her shelf oriented them. "We have only one hotel. At the bus station. There on the first floor is the ticket office, and on the second floor are the rooms. Truckers are stopping more and more. It's an unpleasant place, on the highway. Even though it has plastic windows, it's still noisy." When Tony asked her about the place that was the real purpose of their trip, the aunt hesitated. "I don't know, guys. I heard that tourists used to go to those places. Now they say they don't let them in very much. What do you want to go there for?" Fortunately, Tony managed to change the subject. His aunt was unhappy that he had called a cab, though it was convenient to get to the hotel by bus. "Just get on the 20 right there and 6 stops later, and then walk 500 meters there. You're still calling for a cab. I don't understand you rich people." At other times, they wouldn't have liked the hotel. The room was hot, stuffy. Buses stopped right under the window, but that wasn't the point now. Tony insisted that this day should be devoted to learning as much as possible about the mysterious clinic. Well, the locals must know something, to find out and prepare for the trip. And Lucy insisted on going right now and seeing for herself. "Look," he poked at the phone screen. "Here's a map, satellite. Even if they drive us here. Look at this. The coast is bare. The woods end here. And then there was a beach, and that's it, the lake. We won't make it back before tonight, Lucy. If we're really going to find out anything, we should take a tent, or buy one, or maybe rent one, and pretend we're tourists. Pitch a tent and spend the night. Maybe even at night we'll learn something." Eventually, he managed to convince her. They sat in the cafe, chewing dry pancakes with a sticky substance that looked like boiled condensed milk, drinking liquid coffee, and Tony wrote a list of things they needed to take with them on a paper napkin. The list was short, but the trunk of the cab was full. Nobody goes there now. The cab driver was puzzled when he was given the name of the place, and even before, the guys used to go there with their cold. Rich people never go there. Well, young people, and not even to fish, but just to hang out. Those, you know, crazy people. "The key word is crazy," Lucy muttered. "That's where we need to go. That's who we are." "Ah." The cabbie shook his head and asked for payment in advance. He dropped them off at the very place where the isthmus ends and the peninsula proper begins. "There will be a gate there, and they won't let us through," he explained. "You don't have any permission, do you? You're just curious?" At first, when they wanted to build a base for tourists here, all those people who were obsessed with shamans and mysticism stopped coming here. They said they'd ruined the place, and what could they do in the middle of a construction site? And then when they said that there was a closed institution here or hospital or experiments, people seemed to be interested, but here they made a checkpoint on the road, and it's all a bummer. Maybe there's a way through the woods if you're interested in the lake, but don't go that way, there are swamps there. Before, you could call for help if you got lost or fell through. But now there's no one in these parts. Tony slipped the man an extra $1,000, and he got even more sympathetic. "When you come back, call me and I'll come get you." "Thank you," Tony said. "We're fine with that." Left alone, Tony and Lucy listened to the sounds of the forest for a long time, trying to catch the proximity of people. Nothing. The sound of leaves, the hum of pines, and birdsong. "Shall we try to get to the lake bypassing the road?" Tony asked. Actually, we should get as close to the fence as possible, but without being seen. We'll have to turn off the road anyway. Let's go. Lucy adjusted the straps of her backpack on her shoulders and involuntarily touched her chest, which was aching and heavy, despite all the medicines that the young woman drank. It was very tempting to cry, but what was the point? Lucy only bit her lip hard enough for one pain to override the other. Tony walked ahead, at random with no trail to follow. We should just go down to where it's lower. Lucy listened as she walked to what her husband was saying. Then we'll go out to the lake. They miscalculated a little and ran into a fence, but they only had to walk a little to the right, and it ended. It took them about 10 minutes to get from that place to the lake. It was immediately obvious that no one had been here for a long time, and there was grass through the sand on the beach. And there was no sign of human presence. No remnants of a fire, not even an abandoned piece of paper. The opposite shore of the lake, overgrown with forest, was also deserted. Now we'll make a tent. Tony looked around, choosing a suitable place if we'll be covered here, which is very unlikely. We just came to rest. We didn't know about the band. It's not what you say. Only now, in the light of day, standing a few feet away from Lucy, Tony noticed how thin she really was. All that was left were the sore, haggard eyes. It's not us who will be asked. It's us who will go asking the questions. Otherwise, why are we here? While they were putting up the tent, boiling water on the fire, cooking dinner, they agreed that at night they would go to the fence, walk around its perimeter, try to see everything. Even if tomorrow they would go straight into the tiger's mouth, that is, knock on the gate and demand to be let in. They should know in advance how the place was guarded and whether it would be easy to escape. Lucy knew from experience that it was easier to get in than to get out. They went to bed early when the sun had barely set, assuring each other that they would need their strength. And Lucy dreamed again. This time she knew it was a dream because Jessica was sitting in front of her, not scary or mysterious at all, but exactly as Lucy had last seen her. "I'm getting old," the woman said with infinite sadness, "and I don't want to do this." "Well, okay. Last time. What don't you want?" Lucy asked. The dream began to thin out. She was coming back to reality, though she tried desperately to hold on to the dream. It was important to find out what the clairvoyant wanted to say. Lucy opened her eyes. A few steps away from the tent stood an indistinct figure, whitish like a thick fog. Through it she could see the forest and the lake. Jessica was stern and even majestic now. She made a sign to Lucy to follow her. And nowhere but to that mysterious house, which they had not yet been able to see, and Jessica could not lead them. Sometimes it seemed to Lucy that she was losing her bearings, and there was no one around. She was having a hard enough time as it was, calling herself a fool for not bringing a flashlight. And there was no way to say goodbye to Tony, no way he'd understand, no way he'd let her go, no way he'd make her wait until the appointed time to go together. And the chance was only now. Lucy had no doubt about that. And so she hurried in total darkness, now and then catching on branches, stumbling, stepping into some shallow hollows in the forest floor. But at least she knew where to go, those outlines of a figure that were a little lighter than the darkness around them, and the air there around them wavered slightly, as it does over a campfire. And then suddenly it was gone for a few moments, and that's when panic set in. Lucy, gasping, started to look around, and only calmed down when she saw that spot of light again. Then she suddenly ran into a fence of iron bars, but the ghostly figure led her to the right. After a couple of dozen meters, Lucy saw that Jessica was already standing inside, on the other side of the fence. The young woman hesitated, and then noticed that these two metal bars were farther apart than the others. She could try to squeeze through. With great difficulty she managed to do so, but Tony would certainly not get through. Now she had to be especially careful. If the area was guarded by the same dogs she remembered, the Fila Brasileiro breed, she would be spotted very quickly. No, they weren't ubiquitous dogs, but they'd give her down and hold her until the owners arrived. Fortunately, the old house Lucy wanted was not far away. They hadn't had time to build anything else here yet, or didn't plan to. The lighting was a few lanterns, and Lucy saw 5 or 6 houses, the kind that were easy to assemble, disassemble, and move to another place. The old house, however, was quite different. built of gray stone. Now at night, it seemed as old as the peninsula itself. That is, it had been on bare ground first, and then the forest and everything else. Of course, it couldn't be like that, but Lucy had to pull herself together, because a nauseous wave of unease came up to her throat. There was nothing to think about climbing the low, massive staircase leading up to the main entrance. Lucy realized that, absorbed in what she was seeing, she had let the ghost out of her sight again. Jessica, however, was standing somewhere on the side of the house, her silhouette now casting a dead green glow. It intensified near the house, as if that was where the ghost was getting its power from. About 20 paces, 20 steps across the lighted grounds to the saving darkness. Lucy didn't know how to pray. No one had taught her how. And now she only clenched her eyes tightly for a few moments, clenched her fists, and then darted to where she was waiting. And now the ghost was near. And all this was happening in reality, not in a dream. It was worth stretching out a hand. And this is not some laser show 3Ds. Jessica's image was a stylized image of a simplistic grave marker. But that green color, like swamp lice, but that coldness that came from the figure, that motionless face, without a hint of facial expression. And the gaze was not Lucy's, but straight ahead. The ghost reached out, and a long finger pointed to a door, a half-basement door that Lucy wouldn't have noticed. And all at once, no one was around anymore, and the darkness thickened. The door could have been locked, and even should have been. Lucy remembered how careful her grandmother was about all this. But when the young woman pushed the door, it opened, and Lucy stepped inside. It was a small room, something like a landing, and to Lucy's amazement, there was an elevator, and there were stairs leading down. The elevator would certainly move noisily, and the young woman preferred to go down the stairs, trying to move as quietly as possible. She remembered for some reason that long ago, when she was at school, their class had been taken on a field trip to a hydroelectric plant, and everyone had been impressed by the huge hall and the place where they had been taken to see the top of the turbine spinning. Lucy was fascinated by the moment when the elevator opened. One of the workers entered it, and the girl saw a lot of buttons. "And the lowest floor is what?" she asked. "It's a patherna, an underground corridor." Why did that come to mind now? Yes, and now she was descending into the underground corridor. Only above her head was not the roar of water being grinded by turbines, but there was something else more frightening. It was a deep descent. Again, some sort of stairwell, and another door, and beyond that, behind it, Lucy saw a long, narrow corridor with bars on either side, and behind them were cells, and there were people in the cells. It resembled maybe a prison, which Lucy had never been in, and she had nothing to compare it to except what she had seen in movies. One might have expected these grave cell dwellers to make a fuss when they saw a stranger, and strangers were probably never here, but they were definitely in a state of lethargy. In identical gray-colored hoods with shaved heads, they were in a world of their own. Some of them were lying in their cells, some were squatting, some were mumbling and slurring their words. There was no reaction to Lucy's appearance. She walked down the corridor, looking at the faces and thinking that now the dream had finally begun, because in reality it could not be. Yes, these people differed in physique, facial features, and apparently age. But their facial expressions were a general lack of expression. They reminded Lucy of those very reborn dolls, which are so easy to mistake for alive, but in fact there is no life in them. And there are those people who will never be able to take a reborn in their hands a dead baby, that's all. How many of them are there? Lucy did not count, but most often there was one person in each cell, less often two, at least 50 patients or test subjects. And then her grandmother came out of a side door at the end of the corridor. No, she didn't hear anyone come in. She was in a hurry to run errands. She had papers in her hands. Grandma hadn't changed much over the years. Yes, she had lost a little weight. Wrinkles had become sharper, but that was all. She wore the white robe Lucy saw her in most often, and those glasses Lucy remembered from her childhood. And of course, her grandmother saw her immediately. She didn't seem surprised. She looked over her glasses at Lucy with that questioningly displeased expression with which she greeted her after long absences if her granddaughter was late for a school night or returned from a date later than promised. "Well?" grandmother asked. And Lucy embraced the game. answering in an equally calm tone, "Maybe we can finally talk." Asterisk, asterisk. They sat in her grandmother's study, and everything but the walls was the same as Lucy remembered. The same desk, the same leather couch in the corner, the same leather sofa in the corner where Grandma sometimes sat up late at night, took a nap or two, and then sat down to work again. And the same books were on the shelf. Only now she'd have to talk to Lucy like an adult. "My baby, did you take him?" Lucy asked the very question she came here to ask. "What do you want from me?" Grandma asked. That's where she changed. Her voice was now without any tenderness. On the contrary, there were new notes in it. "That's how you talk to someone you hate. I want you to tell me about your mother. I'm beginning to remember some things, but in bits and pieces. I want you to explain to me what you do to these people you keep in cages. And finally, I want you to tell me where my baby is. Don't tell me you don't know that's a lie." There was another sense of interest in Grandmother's gaze now. A spark flashed when Lucy said, remembering. Aglaia took out a cigarette, put it in the wooden mouthpiece, and lit it. As far back as Lucy could remember, her grandmother smoked only rarely, only a few times in front of her granddaughter. Aglaia bought a few more seconds of time by expelling the smoke. "Well, I'm not going to explain the background of all this to you. If you had become a biologist or a doctor, as we thought," she emphasized the "we" in her voice, "then maybe. But otherwise, it's useless. Yeah, the ones you saw are material. Research material. The very same guinea mice or rabbits or whatever you prefer. In a way, we were like wolves. Those were the sanitarians of the forest, and we were the sanitarians of the urban slums. They're scum, Lucy. You should have seen them before. How many people have passed through your hands like that?" Grandma crinkled her nose. "Stop it. You're not a journalist to make a sensation out of it. An old witch killed 1,000 people for her experiments. Okay, what's the purpose? Someone's dealing in other people's organs. And you so..." Lucy felt dead tired. Grandma shrugged. "Experiments, experiments, most often drugs, less often surgical manipulations. I succeeded in many things. And the continuation of successful experiments was the treatment of people, the very people who suffer from mental illness. Of course, it's all voluntary. They come to me, they bring me money. But I know you," Lucy said. "You didn't do it for the money. It was for science. You're her knight, without fear, but as for reproach." "You think right," Grandma grinned. "And when I'm gone, all this will be made public, and it will serve the medical profession well. Right now, I don't want to bring it all out into the light of day. I don't want sensationalism. I don't want a trial. I just want to do what I have left to do." "What about Jessica?" Lucy suddenly asked. "Why should she?" Grandma was surprised. "She's dead. She's been dead a long time. She's still there, at the old place. That's where she's buried. She's a test subject too, isn't she? Why did you keep her with you? What were her powers?" "Well, she was able to." "How do you explain it?" "It was very sudden. She created a sort of phantom of herself. She'd be in one place and people would see her in another." Lucy was having a hard time keeping it together. After all she had seen and heard, she wanted to squeal like a little girl and beat her fists on the table, shrieking, "It's not true, it can't be." But she had to sit there and ask these dry, impassioned questions. "I understand. People came to you, brought their sick relatives, and you helped them." "Cured them," Grandmother said with involuntary pride. "I did," Lucy agreed. "Let's move on to me. Why did you need me? And why didn't you want to let me go?" Grandma flicked the ash off her cigarette. "Well, as you probably realize by now, you're not my granddaughter at all. I've never had children. Your mother is some kind of hippie, or whatever those subcultures are called. Sorry, it's not my field. Anyway, she just sold you to me. I get kids once in a while. Not often, but they were fun to work with. And you were my first successful experiment. Hence the memory wipe, right? And the fact that you wanted to watch me for the rest of my life? What did you remember?" Grandmother answered the question with a question, and again there was genuine interest in her voice. "A young woman with hair dyed pink. We are traveling with her on the train." Grandmother nodded satisfied. "That's right. She brought you to me. You were sick, Lucy. The only thing you had going for you was boarding school for dogs. Your mother was very young. She heard about me somewhere, came on her last dime, wanted me to cure you." Everything was still so shaky then. I didn't know if I could do it. And I convinced your mother that you should stay here, that you'd get medication for life and you'd have everything you needed. I gave her money. She agreed, which means she gave you to me. Lucy sat with her head down for a while. Then she looked at her grandmother. I offer you a treaty, she said. I interest you as a fortunate experience. I stay with you. You can put me in a cage and never let me out. You can do all the experiments you want, but you will give the girl to my husband. He's here, sleeping in a tent by the lake. Grandma seemed hesitant. My girl is normal. That's why she's of no interest to you at all. And I'll stay with you until your death or mine. Everything was off the scale now. A few languid minutes passed. Grandma picked up the phone. Kirill, come to my place. When a 2-meter tall man stood on the doorstep, Lucy realized what Carl's name really was. Asterisk, asterisk. That's how it all ended. Tony stroked the card box with his fingers. That bastard brought me you and a note from Lucy. She said she wasn't coming back, and if I resisted her decision, then they wouldn't let me or the baby out. Then I stood on the road calling the same cab driver who brought us here. It felt like a lifetime, not 24 hours. He helped me load my stuff. He looked at you, so tiny, and asked me without a second thought, "Where did you lose your mom?" And that's when I cried. Victoria looked out the window for a while, holding back her tears, coping with herself. Then she asked, "We're going to look for her, aren't we, Mom?" I gave my word we wouldn't, but I didn't. And if by some miracle the box came into my hands, it's Mom's handwriting, isn't it? And when Tony nodded, she continued with conviction, "That's it. It's a sign. First, we have to find out what happened to Grandma. Well, not Grandma. What do you know about her? If she had any name in science, and if she's already dead, it must be known. Couldn't have gone unnoticed. We're gonna turn this place upside down, but we're gonna find her." Asterisk, asterisk. They found her 2 years later, when Tony had almost given up hope, but Victoria wasn't giving up yet. Before, from everywhere, from all the scientific institutions with which the professor was once associated, and where they made inquiries, they were told that Julia Stepanovna's trail was lost. Victoria began to write on forums, in groups and social networks, sent photos, and one day she received a message that was not sure. "I think she's buried in our cemetery." They immediately drove to the specified location and indeed found the grave. It was a small town, far from the ill-fated peninsula. So Julia had moved again in the intervening years, maybe more than once. A modest granite monument, 2 dates, and the same photograph that was always published in magazines when they printed the old woman's work. Tony and Victoria stood by the grave for a long time. "Maybe it's all staged," Tony said. "She was crazy herself. She could have faked her own death." "It could be, but we can't lose this thread. We should contact the funeral home. Somebody paid for the funeral, and they always ask for a phone number, some contact information." That's how they took the last step. They got the phone number they were looking for, and in a short time they were talking to an elderly, heavy man who said that in the last months of Julia Stepanovna's life, he worked in the clinic as a sort of administrator. The old woman had left unexpectedly for everyone, a massive heart attack, and she had no time to leave orders about what to do afterwards. She had patients there. Quite a few of them were placed in a boarding school, the one for dogs. Several boarding schools, I think. I don't think there would have been so many places in one. Do you remember this woman? Tony put Lucy's picture on the table. They all looked the same, skinny, bald. Then Uncle started to say, but then he took a closer look. "Oh, that one. She was in the circus, I think. She did magic tricks. She could read minds, find hidden things. Funny girl." Tony and Victoria looked at each other. "Which circus? Do you remember?" Victoria asked baitingly. "No," honestly admitted the uncle, "but there was an interesting number with trained goats. One goat was walking on a wire like a tightrope walker, and on its back sat a monkey in a riding costume. In a red one like that. Yeah, drove the kids around. They laughed so hard. Asterisk, asterisk. I found it," Victoria told her father. "It's almost 100% about this troupe. And they don't have a website, of course. All you can do is find out where they're touring now and go. Look at these pictures. Goat, wire, monkey rider. Good thing we have a lead on this one. They learned that the troop is in the southeast these days in a small prairie town and will be there for another week. They got on the road right away. I have a feeling Mama's there, Victoria said, here to certainty. But after Grandma died, Lucy became a free person, and she hasn't even made an attempt to come back to us. I don't know what to think. Maybe she thought you wouldn't forgive her. I mean, she kind of left you, didn't she? That's ridiculous. Tony was angry, even if you forget about me. Remember what she went through for you. And then she decided not to come back to you. The Chapineau Circus had a show every night. Tony and Victoria stayed at the first hotel they could find and decided to go when the artists were performing. That way they could see Lucy from the outside first. What if you don't recognize her? Victoria worried. Are you crazy? That's not what worries me. Lucy has never been able to do any tricks. She's never had any superpowers. She's just a normal person. So what? Her grandmother kept experimenting on her. We're about to find out. Tony noticed that when he buttoned his shirt, his hands were shaking violently and the buttons were missing their loops. Victoria had helped him get dressed. Shall we buy some flowers? She suggested. Don't. I'm afraid of jinxing it. We'll buy them later. It was the first warm evening of spring, and that in itself seemed like a holiday. There was a park near the square where the circus tent stood. At this hour, there were so many children there that the eyes were scattered. Mothers with strollers, babies who had recently started walking, were gently held by their parents. Older children on tricycles. The whole park was ringing with children's voices. Some had come for the show. Others just strolled around, enjoying the warmth after the long winter. Victoria and Tony bought tickets. Front row, the girl asked. No, objected the father. I don't want her to see us unexpectedly, like this, during the number. We'll go up to her afterwards. Do you have a feeling Mom's in there? I have a feeling. The music started playing. The conversation stopped abruptly. Father and daughter did not take their eyes off the arena. One number after another. But there was no Lucy. There wasn't even anyone who looked like her. Tony glanced at Victoria and saw that the girl was ready to cry. There was only one ride left, motorcycles, when Victoria couldn't take it anymore. Let's get out of here. Wait, Tony clung to his last hope. We're going to ask someone. The usher or something. The usher showed them a tall man in a black vest. He's the man in charge. Look, Tony handed him a picture of Lucy. This woman doesn't work for you. The picture is old. It's been years. He was prepared for the man to shake his head, saying, I haven't seen it. I don't know. But the man took Tony firmly by the elbow. What do you want from her? Come on, let's talk. Please, just for a few minutes. Victoria clasped her hands around her chest in a pleading gesture. The three of them stood behind the circus tent, choosing a place where the music was quieter. It wasn't easy to fit their story into the few minutes Victoria had promised, but they tried. The man ran his hands slowly across his forehead. Yes, we have her. When we took her in, it wasn't that she was sick. It's just that she wouldn't tell us anything about herself. Didn't remember, or told us she didn't remember. Tricks? What special tricks were there? Yes, she could guess in which hand an object was hidden. Sometimes she guessed other people's thoughts surprisingly correctly, but that didn't always happen. You can't perform like that. She's learned a few things here. Why did you take her? Tony asked excitedly. She was sitting outside our carriages this morning. God knows where she came from. She asked to take care of the animals, any kind of work at all. And our wages are low, and we always need people like this, give and take. You could see she was very hungry. That's how she stayed with us. Where is she now? I'm begging you. The man has lost his composure. She really doesn't remember anything. And if you come with your past now, you could ruin her life again. How can that be? Victoria shouted it in a weird syllabic way of her daughter. Do you realize how many years have passed? The man looked at Victoria with pity and at the same time pleading. It's not like that anymore. Everything has changed. She has a different family now. Victoria didn't understand, but Tony did. Lucy got married. The man nodded. She's my wife. But can you at least see her from afar? Victoria couldn't speak from shock, so Tony asked the question. The most important thing for him was to know that Lucy was really there, that she was alive. The man was silent for a moment, then said, She's in the park, walking with her son. He led them over to the fence. There you see, in the red blouse. The distance was great, but it was as if Tony had been given binoculars. He saw Lucy, a stranger, no longer the young girl he remembered her to be. Lucy, with a short haircut instead of long hair. She was sitting on a bench with a boy of about 5 playing at her feet. "Thank you," Tony said to Lucy's husband. He realized he wouldn't go near her. This, the new Lucy, had a peaceful face. And the slight smile with which she looked at the baby said that Lucy was quite happy. What a way to break it all down. But Victoria was no longer around. No one noticed how she disappeared. The girl walked toward her mother and unzipped her bag at the same time. She took out a card box and placed it on her palm. "Isn't this yours?" she asked Lucy, realized that her voice didn't sound, coughed, and repeated the question. Lucy took the box and turned it around with joyful surprise. She had only glimpsed a glimpse of the girl, and of course the thought had not even crossed her mind that, though Victoria looked remarkably like her young. "It's mine. Where did you get it?" Lucy asked. Victoria said she bought the box at a flea market. "In what city?" Lucy asked. "Oh yeah, that's where we were touring. It's always with me, like a talisman. I was so upset when it was stolen from me." Victoria stood staring at her mother in silence, unable to say a word.
Angelica looked thoughtfully out of the window. In the hospital yard, nurses were scurrying back and forth. The janitor was removing snow from the paths. There was a lot of snow this year. There had not been such a blizzard for a long time, which would completely cover the roads, in a matter of minutes hiding the traces of car tires and human feet. The woman thought that she had gotten off easy when she got to the hospital, but she could have been lying in a cemetery by now. She touched the bandage on her head with her hand. It still hurt badly underneath. Falling, Angelica hit her head on the corner of the cabinet, lost consciousness, and when she woke up, she realized that she was in the hospital and nothing threatened her yet. But only for now. Sooner or later she would have to return home, and there, Angelica's sister-in-law sleeps and sees how she will become a full-fledged owner of her mother-in-law's luxurious apartment. Selima doesn't even make any secret of the fact that she has a lover anymore. Goes to him on dates, and Angelica's son, like a blind kitten, does not notice anything. Or doesn't want to notice? "Harry, hello," said the woman, dialing the notary's phone number. "How is your health, you precious man?" "Oh, Angelica, what is health now?" "It has become a dream even for the rich, and for a simple man like your humble servant, Harry, it is out of reach. The whole body aches, I can tell you. But if you ignore some parts, you can live a little longer." The old Jewish notary laughed into the telephone receiver. "Harry, I really need to see you." "What are you talking about, Angelica? Come to my office at any time." This man was always happy to see the daughter of his old friend and the wife of his old friend John, who unfortunately is no longer alive. No, Angelica said hastily. "I can't do it myself. The thing is, I'm in the hospital." "My God, what's wrong with you?" The man was worried. "I'm all right now, but I'd like you to draw up a paper for me." All anyone wants from old Harry nowadays is paper, I tell you. But before, Angelique knew the notary, who was a member of her parents' household. If he started reminiscing, it would be impossible to stop the old man, and she wasn't ready for long stories about the intricacies of Harry's fate, so she tried to interrupt him. "So can you come?" She asked a little louder than she had spoken before. Of course, Angelica," the notary assured her. "Your late father, may he rest in peace, asked me not to refuse your legal requests. What hospital are you in? I'll be there tomorrow morning." Angelica dictated the hospital address to Harry, disconnected the phone. She had to do that because her sister-in-law had gotten a lot of nerve. This country girl with the grip of a tigress would soon throw her, and then Angelica's son out on the street. Lately, it had become abundantly clear to the woman why Selena had married her Anthony. Such predators do not bend any methods to achieve their goal. And the purpose of daughter-in-law Angelica was a luxury apartment on the main street of the city with windows on the waterfront and 3-meter ceilings, decorated with antique stucco, as well as a bank account inherited from her late husband. Housing inherited from her parents, in this apartment she was happy with her beloved husband. Here from the maternity hospital they brought twins Anthony and Betty. The voice of one of the nursing staff called out from the corridor, "Lunch, lunch." The ward mates rose from their beds and headed for the door. It was lunchtime, but Angelica did not move. She continued to lie there. After the stroke, the whole right side of the woman's body was paralyzed, so breakfast, lunch, and dinner were brought directly to her room. So it happened this time. The nurse came in with a tray, placed the plates on the nightstand, and sat down next to her on a chair to feed the woman. She slowly scooped up the noodle soup with a spoon, brought it to Angelica's mouth, and said, "You really need to gain strength to recover, so do not resist, eat." Angelica obediently opened her mouth. Having eaten a little, she said to the nurse, "Thank you, Natalie, for your kindness. Take some candy from the nightstand on the shelf. I have nothing else to thank you for." The nurse tried to refuse at first, but then decided it was better not to argue with a sick woman. She needs peace. She will take the box with treats so as not to upset the sick woman. "Why don't your relatives come to take care of you?" she asked Angelica, adjusting her pillow. "There is no one, Natalie," the woman answered sadly. "My son is almost always on business trips, trying to earn money for his young wife. And what about the daughter-in-law? She could have come at least once a day. At least she could have fed you homemade food. We don't have very good food in the hospital, you see." "My sister-in-law has no time for me," Angelica replied. In the year that Selena lived with them in the same apartment, she had not become close to Angelica. The girl did not consider her mother-in-law at all. On the contrary, did everything to get rid of her. Selena constantly scandalized with Angelica, and their last quarrel was the reason that the woman went to the hospital. "Don't worry," the nurse naively assured her, "I'll take care of you on my shift." She began to bring the woman homemade food, spoon-feeding her, taking out the duck. And Angelica thought, when I get discharged, I should give this girl money. She takes care of her like a close acquaintance, always comes to check on her before she even starts her shift. Angelica was born in the family of a large official, Anthony Walker. Parents were not old. About such moms and dads still say aged parents. But for Angelica, they were always the best. The girl's mom was the director of a weaving factory. She spent all her time at work. Ariana, a woman who lived with them in one of the far rooms, kept order in the apartment, and her daughter. For as long as Angelica could remember, Ariana had always been there for her. No one called the woman a housekeeper. She had long since become a member of the family and Angelica's nanny. Ariana cleaned the apartment, cooked dinner, braided the girl's pigtails. Since her mother was often not at home, Angelica confided all her secrets and mysteries to the nanny. And she treated her like a daughter, or rather like a granddaughter. She checked her homework, made sure that Angelica dressed warmly for walks, knitted for her socks and mittens from sheep's yarn. "All diseases come from the feet," she said for the 100th time, forcing Angelica to put on woolen socks. Feet should always be warm. The girl did not always obey her nanny, but they were mostly friends. When Angelica entered the institute, her father brought a stately man into the house. Ariana set the table in the large living room, arranged the cutlery, and her mother welcomed her father and the guest. "This is John. He was transferred to our department from another agency, so now we will be colleagues. We will do, so to speak, one big thing." The man had kind, beaming eyes. "Very nice," he said, handed Angelica's mother a bouquet of flowers and the girl a box of chocolates. Angelica ran into the living room. "Ariana, look what candy John brought." She showed the gift to the nanny. "Don't open the box. Eat properly first," the nanny warned the girl. Ariana knew that Angelica had a sweet tooth and made sure she didn't get candy in her face as often as possible. At the table that day, there was a relaxed, friendly, almost family atmosphere. Angelica's mother was happy to keep the men talking and seemed cheerful. After that dinner, John began to frequent the Walker house. Usually they locked themselves in his father's study, talked about something, and then went out into the living room, where Ariana treated the men to tea and cottage cheese. One day after such a tea party, John turned to Angelica. "Angelica, could you keep me company? I'd really like to walk along the seafront. It's such a beautiful day." It was a nice May day outside the window. The girl had a summer session ahead of her, but she didn't care much about preparing for exams and credits. She was sure that she would pass everything and go to the 5th year of the economics faculty. Angelica gladly agreed to John's proposal, got an approving nod from her father, and went to her room to change her clothes. "Angelica will graduate soon," Anthony told John. "I should already be thinking about her future. It's time to find a decent groom. I hope, if Angelica doesn't mind, you'll consider my candidacy too." asked the father's colleague with a serious face. "I like your daughter very much, Anthony." We'll see," evasively replied the girl's father, not depriving the groom of the chance to become his son-in-law. This conversation happened to be overheard by Ariana. What are they thinking? The girl has yet to walk, and they are going to marry her, she thought, taking the dishes to the kitchen. Angelica enjoyed the walk along the promenade. John was 15 years older than her. He told her many interesting things, even read poems by Bloch. He came to the capital from Siberia. The man's career quickly went uphill. A true Siberian, John had a strong character and was not afraid of difficulties. He knew that he had a special place in this big city. The only thing that didn't work out for the man was women. Marry was long overdue, and his colleagues hinted about it. But where to meet a woman who will be a faithful wife and friend when you are constantly at work or on business trips? Anthony's daughter at first sight charmed him with her directness. The girl was well-mannered, studied at one of the best universities in the country, not pretty herself. Angelica and John began to meet sometimes, spent time in cafes, went to the movies and exhibitions. After passing the session, the girl had a lot of free time. Outside the city, the family had a large dacha in a pine forest. Usually Angelica and her nanny spent the whole summer there. Ariana thought that Angelica should breathe fresh air, not exhaust fumes, and took her to the cottage. John began to visit them in his foreign car, bringing various delicious things. Sitting in the gazebo, they talked about all sorts of things. Only the man did not like questions about his work. "It is the most boring of all that I can tell you," he said. Angelica didn't really insist. She asked, more out of politeness, "How are things at work?" But she didn't want him to talk about it. Ariana did not interfere with the young people, but she looked out of the window, noticing things that a stranger would not have noticed. For example, she saw how the man looked at Angelica with loving eyes, how each time he tried to take her hand. But Angelica wasn't particularly amenable to such manipulation. Ariana had raised her well, taught her to keep her ear to the ground with men. "It's a bit old for our girl to have a fiancé, 15 years older. She should have a young one to go dancing with," the woman thought to herself as she took a tray of pies out of the oven. She put the tea and treats on a tray and took them to the gazebo. "Help yourselves, they're freshly made," Ariana said and went into the house. "Your housekeeper's pies are very tasty," John praised. "I eat them and can't get enough. I can't even eat anymore, but my hands are still reaching for more." In mid-August, Angelica and Ariana returned to the city. Soon Angelica would start the most responsible period. She had to prepare for her diploma. Before the new year, John returned from a business trip. The man came to their apartment. He and his father had a long conversation in the study. When they came out, the father told Angelica and her mother that John wanted to talk to them. "I would like to ask you," he said to Angelica's father's wife, "and to Anthony for your daughter's hand in marriage. I have long been in love with Angelica, and I promise I will do everything I can to make her happy." The girl's cheeks flushed scarlet, and she sat with her eyes downcast. From the doorway, Ariana was watching. "Here comes the groom's time. John is matchmaking our girl," she thought. Angelica's mom smiled. "So, is Angelica up for it? Did you ask her?" "I'm sorry, no." The groom was embarrassed. "I decided to get your support first." "Well, Anthony and I will be happy to have such a decent and respectable man by our daughter's side. What do you say, daughter?" She looked at Angelica carefully. It could not be said that Angelica was in love with John, but she definitely liked this adult, intelligent man. He made her feel at ease. In all this time, he'd never done anything to push her away from him. "I agree," Angelica replied, looking into John's eyes. "This case needs to be spritzed," her father said cheerfully, pulling a bottle of champagne from the bar section of the buffet wall. Ariana jumped up, setting the flutes and a box of chocolates on the table. Anthony poured the sparkling wine into glasses, looked around at everyone present, said, "Well, now we are calm for our daughter, advice as they say, and love to the young." Everyone clinked glasses. The clinking of glasses brought a share of joy and fun in the slightly tense atmosphere of matchmaking. "When you get your diploma, you can have a wedding. I will try to make it the most beautiful and lavish, because Angelica is my only daughter." New Year's Eve was ahead. This holiday always gave hope for the best. Everyone was in high spirits. Angelica felt that a new life and many joyful events were ahead of her, one of which was a wedding. But fate ordered otherwise. When the New Year's vacation was over, the household returned to their usual routine. Angelica was preparing for the defense of her diploma, sometimes met with John. Her parents worked, occasionally sharing news over dinner. Her father was increasingly in a bad mood. He was in some kind of trouble at work. Angelica could hear her mother reassuring her husband, "Everything will get better, so do not worry, you have a sick heart." Father's health also left much to be desired. He said that he would marry off his daughter and retire. "I will live in the country, breathe fresh air, fishing, and wait for my daughter to give me grandchildren," Anthony dreamed. One day, the phone rang in the Walker apartment. Ariane answered the phone. "Walker's apartment, I'm listening," she said, holding the receiver in one hand and the rag she had just used to sweep up the dust in the other. Nanny's face was suddenly pale, and she leaned against the wall. When Angelica saw that Ariana was not feeling well, she ran over to her and snatched the telephone receiver. A man's voice was heard in it, finishing what he had started. "It happened in his office. The ambulance didn't make it. Anthony died before the doctors arrived. A heart attack." Angelica's temples pounded hard, her heart beating feverishly. "This can't be. It's a mistake," she thought. There were many strangers at the funeral. The funeral procession walked down the cemetery avenue, and it seemed there would be no end to it. Behind the coffin walked Angelica's mother, Ariana, John supporting his fiancée by the elbow. The wife of the deceased was blacker than a cloud. She looked as if she had aged over the days, like a hunched old woman, not the blooming, well-groomed woman Angelica had always seen. When the coffin was lowered into the grave, Angelica's mother sobbed loudly. John put his arm around her, tried to lead her away. The girl followed. They were not at the wake, which was organized for colleagues and close friends of Anthony. At home, sat silently at the table. The oppressive silence was unbearable. In the morning, Angelica's mom was found in the bathroom. An empty bottle of sleeping pills lay beside her. She was dead. The shocks that had suddenly descended on Angelique had crippled her. She fell into a severe depression, stopped preparing for the defense of the diploma, all the time lying in her room. John tried to bring her out of this difficult state, but attempts did not yield anything. Ariana was mad that Angelica didn't eat anything. She tried to feed her, but she just pulled a blanket over her head and turned her back to the wall. "We have to do something. We have to save Angelica," she said worriedly to John, pouring tea into a cup. "You better think of something to distract her." "I've already thought of everything. I don't know how to help her." "Maybe a doctor," the nanny suggested. "No way," John said. "Angelica is in such a state that she could be committed to a mental institution." Ariana groaned. She didn't even want to think about it. "Let me take her to your cottage," the man said. "There everything is familiar to Angelica, and on the other hand calm and quiet. I think a few days surrounded by nature will do her good." "And indeed go," agreed the housekeeper, "and I'll cook you some food with me. Angelica's not used to kitchen chores. She'll starve you and herself." John's idea bore fruit. Angelica did feel better. Sitting by the fireplace in the evenings, they talked about her parents. The girl remembered her childhood, trips to the sea, trips to the zoo, family holidays. These memories warmed her petrified heart. John realized that having lost her parents, she needed support, a strong shoulder more than ever. "You know, Angelica," he told her, looking at the fire in the fireplace, "it seems to me your parents are calm for you now, because they know that I am with you. They have given their consent to our marriage, their blessing. I will take care of you. We'll take care of their graves together, visit them often. The grief will gradually become less tearing. You and I will never forget them, but we must move on." "What do you mean?" Angelique asked. "I think a big wedding is out of the question. A year, at least, it is necessary to keep mourning. But you can't be alone now. You can't be without protection. You know," the man took the girl's hand and looked into her eyes. "I suggest that you and I sign the marriage, becoming your husband officially. I can always be there for you." "You're probably right," Angelica replied. She needed John. He was calm, caring. She had no other person so close to her. The man reached out to Angelica, hugged and kissed her. She felt his strong body gradually dissolved in his embrace and kisses. Taking the girl in his arms, John proceeded to the bedroom. A month later, they were married. They simply came to the registry office together, signed the document, and exchanged wedding rings. At home, Ariana set a festive table and sat down next to it. "To the young," said the woman solemnly and raised a glass of champagne. "Live happily ever after." Life went on as usual. Angelica defended her diploma, got a job as an economist. She gave herself to her work. John went for a promotion. Responsible position required from him dedication and time. He often went on business trips, but every time he returned, he appeared on the doorstep of their apartment with a bouquet of flowers and gifts for his beloved wife. They became very close, dear people. Despite being busy, they used every opportunity to be together. In summer, they went on vacation to the sea, and in winter, they spent time at the dacha, enjoying snowy landscapes and pine scent. The couple dreamed of children, but Angelica did not get pregnant. She went to the doctor several times, but the gynecologist said that her health was fine. John refused to go to the hospital, saying that he had no time for this nonsense. He was healthy and just apparently, it was not yet time for them to become parents. Lying in the hospital room, Angelica thought about the fact that she had brought up her son correctly. He was her helper, but her daughter. The woman tried not to think about her daughter Vale, because every time she thought about her, her heart ached. 10 years had passed since Angelica and John had gotten married. They were preparing to celebrate Angelica's husband's 50th birthday. Together with Ariana, the woman was preparing the menu when suddenly she didn't feel well. A little blurred in the eyes, a nasty lump came to the throat. When Ariana noticed something wrong, she brought a glass of water. "Are you feeling better?" Worried about Angelica's health, she asked. "Yes, I'm going to lie down and then we'll finish our business," Angelica said and went into the bedroom. Despite the absence of children, she and John were happy. Her husband loved Angelica without memory, protected her from trouble, made sure that she did not need anything. He kept his word to her parents, and Angelique was happy with him. Every day she felt more and more warmth for this man, already beginning to gray. When John came home from work, Ariana met him in the hallway. "Where is Angelica?" the man asked. "She is resting in your bedroom. She was not feeling well, so she lay down," said the woman, taking the coat from John's hands. "Will you have dinner?" "Later, I'll go and see how Angelica is feeling." The man went into the bedroom. She was lying there with her eyes closed. It seemed that Angelica was asleep, but she was just immersed in her thoughts and did not hear her husband enter. He quietly sat down on the bed, took his wife by the hand. "Darling, what's wrong with you? Are you tired or sick?" Carefully, tenderly asked John. "Yes, that something was not good, so I lay down," replied his wife. "I'll make an appointment and take you to the clinic tomorrow." "It will pass, Archie, don't worry." Angelica tried to refuse a visit to the doctor. She hated going to hospitals. "Don't even argue, or I'll tie you up with ropes and take you by force," her husband joked. The next day, as promised, he took Angelica to the clinic, where she was examined. It turned out that the cause of the woman's indisposition was pregnancy. The couple were overjoyed, and Ariana, having learned the happy news, started to bake a birthday cake. "This is the best present for my anniversary," John enthused. "I can't imagine what could make me so happy. How much I love you, my dear." At the first ultrasound, it became clear that Angelica and John will have twins. My husband said joyfully, "We will shoot at once. We will give birth to 2 kids at once." The second medical screening showed that a boy and a girl will be born. The couple were glowing with happiness. A son and a daughter at the same time. Sister and brother will be friendly, always support each other, and parents will try to bring them up worthily. Despite the fact that the pregnancy was hard, and Angelica had to go to the hospital from time to time, the births were without complications. The first to be born was Betty, and 2 minutes later, Angelica heard the cry of her son Anthony. The parents came up with names for the children in advance. The girl decided to call Betty, because that was the name of John's late mother, and the boy in honor of Angelica's father. The daughter was born chubby, strong, and the boy was born weak, weighed only 2 kilograms, 600 grams. For several days, he was not brought to his mother. Angelica was worried, but the doctor said that this is normal in the birth of twins and that everything will be fine. And John came to the maternity hospital every day, visited his wife. As a respected man in town, he could not refuse visits. Every time he entered the room with a bouquet of flowers and a bag of fruit, smiled a happy smile. "How are my chicks here?" The man bent down to the babies and admired their cute faces, touched their fingers, took them in his arms, and walked around the ward. "How happy I am, dear. Very soon there will be a lot of children's laughter in our house. These little feet will run from room to room, and Ariana will follow them with porridge and cakes." The couple laughed, rejoicing at the birth of their children. They were now mom and dad to 2 adorable little ones. How happy their grandparents would be together with them. The fact that the parents did not live to see this joyous event was the only reason to feel a little sad. Everything else in life seemed rainbow and cloudless. But the children grew up surprisingly distant from each other. Unlike the other twins who, as people say, are inseparable, always together and almost never apart, Betty and Anthony were not friendly. They often fought over toys, took desks away from each other at school, never played together in the yard. Parents didn't understand this behavior. You should stand for each other. You were together in the womb, almost simultaneously appeared in the world, but you fight, calling each other names, once again reprimanded his daughter and son father. How can you not be ashamed? Anthony poured black paint on my drawing, and now I have to draw again to hand in my homework to the teacher, complained Betty with tears. Dad, it wasn't me, she pushed me. That's why the paint spilled, justified Anthony. Stop it, sternly said the father. You are brother and sister, so you should help each other, not quarrel. Go and wash yourselves and make up now. The children's truce did not last long. They quarreled constantly, easily finding reasons to quarrel. As they grew older, they fought even more violently. Once Betty cut Anthony's favorite t-shirt with scissors. Then the boy took her hairspray and ruined her dress, which was prepared for the prom at school. At the noise, parents rushed into the room. The kids, all grown up, about to graduate from high school, were fighting desperately like street teenagers. The father pulled Betty and Anthony into different corners. This is unthinkable, he scolded his offspring. You're not just siblings, you're twins. You're supposed to be one. But you fight all the time. When will it stop? I'm asking you. Soon, Daddy, Betty said. Soon I'll go to college and leave you, then live here with your beloved Anthony. Because of the fact that the son was born weak, his parents, without noticing it, made him more favors than Vala. And the girl took offense at this. She was an excellent student, drew beautifully, showed great promise in art school, dreamed of entering the Academy of Painting. Anthony studied mediocre, often brought home unsatisfactory marks. But his parents did not scold him for this, again and again hired tutors, hoping that the guy will pass the state exams well and will be able to enter the university. Angelica was most of all worried about her son's future. Sometimes when they were alone, Angelica would say to her husband, "You must support Anthony, get the support of acquaintances to get him into the institute if he does not get a passing grade." "I'm not sure about that," John replied. "Why not?" His wife was getting nervous. "First of all, it's very ugly. I will go to the offices of officials and ask for a guy. The way you see it, don't you think it's humiliating for me? And second of all, stop patronizing him. I know you're gonna say your son's gonna be a kid for the rest of your life, but he's an adult. He's got to take care of his own future." John could still give many arguments, but noticing the tears in the eyes of his wife, he instantly stopped her upset. He promised that he would do everything. Anthony would go to university. Meanwhile, the time of exams was approaching. Angelica was worried because recently she had been summoned to school by the class teacher of her son and daughter. The teacher was worried about Dima's progress. "He does not do his homework at all," she complained to the mother of her pupil. "He almost doesn't work at lessons." At the blackboard, he answers uncertainly. "I understand that he is no longer a first grader, but we still need to supervise Anthony. Please pay attention to this." Angelica and John went to the graduation ceremony together. Today, their children will receive the main document, which in many ways will determine their future fate. "BT is the pride of our school," said the principal, presenting the girl with a certificate of full secondary education and a gold medal. His document was full of threes. This upset Angelica very much. At home, she started talking to her husband again, so that he could get her son into the institute using his connections. "Listen, Angelica," John said affectionately, "with such grades and unwillingness to learn, maybe he should go to a technical school." "Why?" "He'll get a profession and go to work. That way he'll be self-sufficient." Angelica sighed. She realized that her husband was right. Anthony didn't show any ability in school. And what made her think that the boy would do well in the institute? Or what? John would have to address every session to influential acquaintances, so that professors put his son credits and good grades. In the end, Angelica agreed. Anthony enrolled in college. Beatty realized her dream, enrolled in the Academy of Painting, and went to New York. For the parents of adult children in life, nothing has changed, except that the apartment became quiet, quarrels and fights stopped. His future bride Anthony met in college. The girl finished 9 grades in her small town and went to the capital for a beautiful life. The guy met with her for a year, but did not tell his parents anything. Recently, the father felt badly. Doctors even recommended that he go to the hospital, but the man refused. "No way, lying in a hospital bed is not for me." He was very worried about his daughter. Betty was studying and living away from home. She didn't come to visit, not even for vacations. She didn't call herself, and when her parents dialed her number, she spoke one-wordedly and reluctantly. She was offended at them for the fact that all her life they had been protecting her brother, indulging him in everything. And now, at his age, many people already work or work part-time, as she herself, selling paintings, and this brat continues to sit on his parents' necks. John has long wanted to hint to his son that it is time to become independent, but each time postponed this conversation, so as not to worry his wife. Angelica did not seem to notice that Anthony was no longer a snotty boy, but a grown man. When she heard the sound of the door opening, she rushed to the kitchen to heat Anthony's dinner, always gave money for expenses, although her husband forbade her to spoil her offspring. When John heard that she was slipping her son money again, he grumbled. "Betty herself lives away from us, sells her paintings, for all this time has not asked for a dime, and Anthony you always patronize like a small child. Come on, he's got to start being a man. What is it with you and Betty? If she wants to live away from her parents' home, let her do so," Angelica shrieked. Anthony had been getting it from her all his life, like a cat and a dog. Let him enjoy peace of mind now. Didn't you slip money to Violet quietly? And now surely, at the first opportunity, you transfer it to her card. Don't compare, Angelica. Anthony's a man. He should act like one, not sit under his mother's skirt. John was angry. His face instantly turned a shade of purple. He wasn't. Angelica continued to defend her son. She was offended that her husband was hitting on her favorite. He is studying, getting a profession as you wanted. He will get a diploma, will go to work, and now it is already hard for him. Well, of course your Democrat is having a hard time doing things that other people don't have a problem with. And all you? John suddenly grabbed his heart, fell on the sofa. What's the matter with you? His wife ran around him. You're not well. Archie? Wait, I will now bring medicine from the kitchen. The woman ran away, took out the medicine cabinet, quickly went through the pills and vials with medicines, poured a glass of water. When she returned to the living room, the spouse was dead. The paramedics declared a heart attack. Betty arrived on the day of the funeral. She entered the apartment quietly. The mirrors in the rooms were covered with black scarves. Her mother sat at the table, unmoving. "Hello, Mother," the girl said. Angelica didn't even turn her head. Betty came closer, put her arm around her mother's shoulders, said quietly, "Hold on." But Angelica pulled away from her. At the funeral, she didn't shed a tear. She just stood there in silence. When the coffin was lowered into the grave, she came up and threw a clod of earth first. She walked slowly away. Anthony followed her. Betty waited until the cross was placed on the grave and placed a large basket of red carnations at the headboard. The wake was held at home, with only family and a few of John's co-workers in attendance. Everyone said something nice about the deceased. Betty decided to speak up. Daddy was a wonderful man. He was loved and respected by everyone. He was an authority in the service and an authority in the family for us, his children. It was you who killed him, Angelica said, raising her eyes to her daughter. Those sitting at the table looked at the woman in surprise. It was because of you he was worried, and his sick heart could not stand it. You wagged your tail at the first opportunity to go far away and left your father and mother, and now you say that you loved him. That's what loving children do. A murderer of your own father. That's what you are. Mom, what are you saying? Exclaimed Betty. Why are you calling me Daddy's killer? Because you were the reason we argued the day he died. You made him so nervous that his heart couldn't take it. You tore his heart to shreds. I will never forgive you. Angelica dropped her head in her hands and Betty ran out of the house. The guests one by one quietly got up and left. They had witnessed a disgusting scene. Angelica had observed a year's mourning for her husband. For a year, she and her son went to visit his father's grave. While removing the weeds, the woman lamented, "You should know how hard it is for us without you, my darling. Anthony and I are all alone. Ariana's gone to her village, and I'm all alone on the farm. Your Betty hasn't called at all. She didn't even come to the grave. She didn't bring flowers for her father, your favorite." Angelica, lost in herself, did not even notice how Betty quietly approached the fence, red roses in her hands. "Hello, Mother," she said through force, as if it would be very difficult to pronounce the words. "Ah, you're here," said her mother angrily. I guess her conscience had gotten the better of her. "Come on, Anthony." They left, and Betty put the flowers on the grave, took a rag out of the bag, wiped the monument of dust. She had something to tell her father. A few months ago, Betty had given birth to a son. They say that if someone passes away in the same year and another person is born, he or she will make up for the loss by replacing the grieving relatives of the deceased, Betty said, referring to the photograph on the monument. "Billy makes me feel better, Daddy. He looks a lot like you, his grandfather. Ah, if you had seen him, you would have loved my baby and your grandson very much." The next morning at home, Angelica put the mourning bandage back on her head. Anthony, who came out for breakfast, shook his head sadly. "Mom, maybe you should stop grieving for your father. You can't bring him back." He took a piece of bread, calmly spread butter, and put 2 slices of cheese on top. "All the more so because I have important news for you, which I've been wanting to share with you for a long time. I've been hesitating because I've seen how much you've been hurting for Daddy." "What's the news, son?" Angelica asked. "I have a girlfriend. We've been dating for a long time. We met in college." The boy's eyes shone at the memory of his beloved. "Her name is Selena, and she is very beautiful." The mother smiled, stroking her son's head. "The girl must be very beautiful indeed, since my Anthony's eyes are shining so much," she thought. "Tomorrow, I want you to meet her. Will you cook something nice for dinner?" "Of course, son. Bring her to our house. And do not worry about dinner and treats." Angelica suddenly felt that this news began to warm her soul. Her son had fallen in love, and maybe soon he would marry. She would have a daughter-in-law who would help her mother-in-law take care of Anthony and Angelica herself. All the next day she fussed in the kitchen. Angelica was baking meat in the oven, chopping salads, and on the table was a pan of dough for Anthony and his beloved sweet cherry pie. The woman thought about the fact that her son was all grown up. He already had a girlfriend. If everything goes well, soon there may be grandchildren. Angelica heard the sound of the door opening. She quickly took off her apron, hurried to meet her son and the guest. Anthony introduced his beloved. "Meet Mom. This is Selena, my fiancée. And this is my mom, Angelica." The guy was glowing with happiness. His mother smiled too. "I'm very happy, Selena. Come into the hall." The girl was really very beautiful. Dark blonde hair fell from her shoulders in elastic curls. Her chiseled figure immediately attracted the eye. Selena threw off her high-heeled shoes and followed Anthony. While the woman set the table, Selena and her son looked at the pictures in the family photo album. Angelica paused for a moment when she saw a picture of the family with her now-deceased husband and Betty, who had left them on a trip to the sea. The woman felt a little sad at the memory, but she tried to banish the unhappy thoughts from her mind, because today was a very important day when her son was introducing her to his girlfriend for the first time. At dinner, Angelica decided to ask Selena about her parents. Not that she cared what kind of family she was from or what mom and dad did. She just needed to keep the conversation going. "I'm from a small town. My mom and dad are simple people. My mom sells clothes at the market, and my dad works as a construction foreman," Selena answered without a shadow of embarrassment. "There is no place to study there, so I came here and met Anthony." The girl looked at the guy in love, but it seemed to Angelica that she did it theatrically, naively, not sincerely. Then she tried to change the subject. "And what will you work after graduating from college?" Selena asked Dima's mother. "Mom, well, why are you attached to the girl? Let me eat in peace." Anthony tried to spare Selena from his mom's questioning. "Nothing wrong. Just your mom wants to get to know me better," interrupted his girlfriend. "In general, by education, I will be a technologist for sewing outerwear. But frankly, I do not want to work in the specialty. I think that a wife should spend more time with her husband, not to earn money." The word wife cut Angelica's ear. She thought that the girl had far-reaching plans. She already sees herself as her son's wife. On the one hand, there was nothing wrong with that, but on the other hand, Angelica was not very pleased. She didn't understand why, but something was weighing on her. Selena seemed fake to her, like a doll that looks at you with a smile from a store window with beautiful eyes, but there is no human warmth in them. Anthony noticed how his mother's face changed when she heard the words husband and wife. He decided to take the lead in the conversation. "Yes, Mom, Selena and I are planning to get married." Next week, we're going to apply at the registry office. We've already picked a date too. We'll get married right after we graduate from college. Maybe we should get a job first, start earning money to organize a wedding banquet, for example. Actually, to marry a son is the responsibility of his parents, intervened in the dialogue of Angelica and Duma Selena. It's always been done that way. Parents marry their children, so to speak, give their blessing, play the wedding, and then the young begin to build their own life. Angelica did not understand what so much corrupted her behavior, in words, even in the tone of the girl. And it was pointless to argue. In the past, always arranged weddings parents, but Angelica is already retired. Her husband has long been in the grave. There are, of course, some savings and money in the account, which the husband was saving for a trouble-free old age. But just skip the financial safety cushion is, at least, stupid and not thought out. Angelica had no intention of spending the money from the stash. "Tell me, Selena," she asked the girl, "do your parents know that you are getting married? Are they going to be involved in organizing the wedding? Are they going to give you money for it?" The girl's cheeks flashed scarlet. It was obvious that she was uncomfortable with the question. "They'll know when we apply. Why talk before the time? And they'll give us money. Where will they go? I'm their only daughter. If you want, Anthony and I will calculate everything and provide an estimate, and you and my parents will invest 50-50. I think that's okay." "Well, it's okay. Angelica tried to change the subject of the conversation, which was beginning to heat up the atmosphere at the table. "And how do you spend your free time, Selena?" she asked. "I go out with my friends. Sometimes we go to the club to dance and relax." The girl began to list her entertainment, and Angelica thought, "Rest. It's strange. It's what today's young people are so tired of." She clearly did not like the choice of her son, but the woman decided that Anthony has the right to choose his own wife, and since he loves Selena, it means that there is a reason. Angelica got ready to clear the table and asked Selena to help. "We'll bring the cake and the tea set and have tea," Anthony's mother said, trying to look benevolent. "Mom, let me help you myself," suddenly volunteered the son. The boy grabbed the plates and carried them to the kitchen. "What do you think of her? Isn't she a wonderful girl?" "Wonderful," Angelica said thoughtfully. She didn't want to upset her son, didn't want to quarrel with him. The woman thought that there was still time to open Anthony's eyes to his girlfriend. And the first meeting should not be marred by squabbles and finding out who was right. After tea and cake, the young people left. "I'll see Selena off and come back. Don't be bored," Anthony told his mother. Angelica had no time to be bored. She began to wash the dishes, all the while wondering what was so alarming, so repulsive about this girl with the model looks. She should be glad. Anthony would have a very beautiful wife. Not every man could boast of that. He will enjoy going out with her for walks, appearing in the companies of friends, visiting theaters, going on vacation. Not stopping to think about her son, Angelica prepared to go to bed. When Anthony returned, she did not hear, falling into a heavy sleep. The wedding was played at the end of June. After receiving his diploma, Anthony got a job in a large construction company. He did it not without the help of his mother. Angelica all her life tried to push her son through at the expense of her husband's acquaintances. This time she called one influential official, with whom John had once worked, and asked for a favor. A friend of her late husband did not refuse, having learned that the guy is going to start a family, was happy for him, and promised. "I'll find a suitable position for him. Don't worry, Angelica. I understand. Now is such a time. Who else will help children to get on their feet, as not parents?" He kept his promise. Anthony had been going to work every morning for 2 weeks. His mother carefully prepared breakfast for him and waited for him at dinner in the evening. But most of the time Anthony went to Selena's house right after work. "We have a lot to discuss about the upcoming wedding," he told his mother over the phone. "Go to bed. Don't wait up for me." The future bride and groom made a guest list. Looking at it, Angelica asked, "Why didn't you invite Daddy's friends with their wives, son?" "Why, Mom? They are not our relatives. We almost do not communicate." "And that Selena has so many relatives that I see only them in the list?" The woman, perplexed, looked at the unfamiliar names. "It's good to have a lot of relatives. We have only Betty and Ariana. Nanny has always been like family to us, but she's old and won't go this far, and there's no point in inviting Valpet if you've quarreled." "Let's not spoil the party," Anthony said. "Oh, yes, Mammy. I was wondering if you withdrawn the money from the account. We have to pay for the restaurant, the photographer, the host, and Selena wants us to take a white limousine to the registry office." Angelica sighed. Her son had been telling her for days that he needed money. She'd given him everything in the house, but she didn't want to touch the account her husband had left behind when he died. "Maybe you'll get an advance at work," she asked her son. "You can spend it on a limousine." "What's an advance, Mom?" Anthony waved his hands. "It's just cents, and we want everything to be upscale." "And Selena's parents?" Angelica tried to cut back again. "Why don't they give money for their daughter's whims?" "They agreed to pay half," Anthony said, "but right now they're in temporary difficulties. They will give in installments later, after the wedding." "Interesting, so the wedding is on me," thought a frustrated Angelica. In order not to upset her son on the eve of such an important event for him, she promised that tomorrow she would go to the bank and bring the necessary amount. The restaurant was noisy, the guests were partying, the tables were bursting with food and wine was pouring. The next day, Anthony asked his mother for more money. "You see, we realized that we should definitely go on a wedding trip," he told his mother. "Selena has never been to the sea in her life, so we want to go to a resort for a week. Don't you think that's too much?" Angelica asked. "It does not seem." Feeling that his mother is against their idea, Anthony pouted his lips, began to take offense. "We are so tired from the wedding preparations, from the noise and the numerous guests, that we must have a rest and relax. So ask her parents for money," Angelica said, starting to get annoyed. They promised to give half of the money spent on the wedding. At that moment, Selena entered the kitchen, where the mother and son were talking. It was obvious from her face that she had heard everything. "Honey, your mom just wants us to go to work before we get married, working from morning till night. Is that the beginning of a happy family?" "I don't mind your vacation," Angelique said, barely restraining herself from telling her sister-in-law that it was wrong to eavesdrop. "Just pay for it yourself or ask your parents." "Mom, well, I told you, Selena's parents have temporary financial difficulties," sided with his young wife Anthony. "And your father left you money, you have it. I know it is in the bank and does not bring any benefit, except for the meager interest. Why not give it to us for our wedding trip? Don't you want us to be happy?" Angelica has already realized where the wind is blowing from. Selena puts her wishes into Anthony's head and he, in love to the point of madness, blinded by his feeling, runs to fulfill them. And the fact that they will be happy, it's still an old saying, as old people say. With such a wife would rather go to the world than find a normal full-fledged family. With a heavy heart, Angelica went to the bank. When she saw the envelope with money, Anthony rejoiced, kissed his mother on the cheek and ran into the room to make his young wife happy. Angelica spent the week that they were vacationing at a fashionable resort, thinking. The apartment was quiet. No one prevented her from indulging in memories of her husband and thinking about the future of her son. Having returned from a wedding trip, the young began to take apart the suitcases with excitement. "We brought so many gifts to everyone," chirped daughter-in-law, taking out beautiful silk scarves, alcohol, some sweets, other things. "So this is for my mother, this is for my aunts, this is for my friends. And you too, Angelica, we have not forgotten." The girl handed her mother-in-law a magnet with the image of the resort where they vacationed. "Here, hang on the fridge, you will remember our wedding trip," joyfully she said. Mother-in-law took the magnet, twirled in her hands, calmly went to the kitchen and stuck the gift on the refrigerator door. She did not want to go back to the young people. She poured tea and sat by the window. The next day, when Anthony left for work, the daughter-in-law said to her mother-in-law, "I think it's time for you to move to the cottage." "Why not?" Angelica wondered. "I live here, this is my apartment, and I go to the dacho when there is a desire to be in the fresh air. Moreover, summer will soon pass. What will I do there?" "What do you mean?" My daughter-in-law made big rounded eyes. "Like all pensioners, sit by the TV, relax, knit socks after all. I'm not going anywhere from my apartment, don't even count on it." Cut off mother-in-law. "If you want, yourself move to the dacha. This is not only your apartment, but also my husband," hissed like an angry snake, Selena. "So we have the right to decide how we live and who will be next to us. Don't you realize that young people are uncomfortable at night when you are behind the wall?" "The conversation is over," Angelica said and went to her room. She was shocked by her unscrupulous daughter-in-law's demand to leave her 5-room apartment. There was more than enough room for 3. Angelica's childhood had passed here, her happy life with her beloved husband. She had a lot of ties with this apartment, and now some bimbo is going to kick her out of her home. In the evening, coming home from work, Anthony attacked his mother. Apparently, Salima had already complained to him about her mother-in-law. "What's the news, Mom?" he shouted. "Selena told me that you are forcing us to move out of the apartment, to live at the cottage. You can imagine how inconvenient it is 2 hours to get to work, and Selena even has to take the train to go to the store and then come back with full bags. It's very cruel. I'm your son. I have a right to live in my own apartment, and you shouldn't kick us out." Having caught a pause in her son's monologue, Angelica managed to say, "I did not kick anyone out. It is your wife demanded that I moved out to the country house. So it's quite reasonable. Selena's right. At the cottage you will be calmer, and we will come on weekends, bring groceries. Did it ever occur to you that I have my own hand on my shoulders? Why it is a stranger to me girl should dictate how and where I live?" Angelica was indignant. "A stranger?" Anthony looked offended. "So my Selena is a stranger to you? I didn't think you'd say that, Mom." Anthony walked out and slammed the door. The summer and then the fall flew by. Angelica tried not to notice her daughter-in-law, though she did her best to constantly clash with her mother-in-law. She skillfully ignited conflicts and then complained to Anthony that his mother had lost her mind. For example, today she was cleaning the whole apartment, but she did not even deign to clean the floor and wipe the dust in his and Anthony's room. "My mother-in-law thinks that we can live in filth like pigs in a stable," Selena complained to her husband. "Or yesterday I put my plate in the sink, and then your mom had lunch. So she washed her plate, and mine defiantly left it lying there dirty. Your mother does everything to make our lives a nightmare." Anthony would run over to my mom's house and start a fight. "Why don't you dust our room at the same time? Didn't you have the energy to wash an extra plate?" "You know, son, take care of yourself," Angelique replied. "Your wife can also calmly take a bucket and a rag, mop the floor. A good daughter-in-law would have cleaned the whole apartment herself to help her mother-in-law." "Ah, I'm also a bad wife," screamed Selena. The girl was eavesdropping in the hallway, leaning against the doorjamb. "Your mother is out of line. She wants to divorce us." With a reproachful look at her mother, Anthony rushed to comfort the theatrically wringing his hands and let a fake tear of the young wife. One day, Angelica saw her son packing a suitcase. She was frightened. Were the newlyweds going to move out? She was not ready to lose her son. Concerned, the woman asked, "Are you going somewhere, son?" "Yes, Mom. They're sending me on a business trip. I will often go to the neighboring town. Our company has a new facility there, supervised by me," Anthony replied. "It's a promotion, you know. The salary will be higher." Angelica was happy for her son. She hugged him, then looked out the window. A snowstorm was blowing. Winter had started unexpectedly fast. A lot of snow fell at once, and the weather brought surprises in the form of cold wind and frost. "Be sure to take a warm sweater," her mother said thoughtfully. "You'll probably spend a lot of time outdoors. God forbid you catch a cold." The woman gave her son a knitted sweater, and he put it in his suitcase. "Thank you," Anthony thanked his mother. "Do you know where Selena is?" "I don't know. She left this afternoon, still not here. I asked her to get some milk. I wanted to make you some pancakes." "I'll call her a reminder, don't worry," Anthony reassured Angelica. He sat the woman on the couch, sat down next to her and hugged her. At that moment, she felt the warmth of a loved one again. The mother laid her hand on her son's shoulder. He married early and chose the wrong girl to be happy," she thought. Lately, she had been feeling that Anthony was suffering, that not everything in their relationship with Selena was as smooth as he would like it to be. Her sister-in-law returned late. From the doorstep, Anthony began to ask her why she had come at such a late hour and where she had been. At a friend's house, the young wife said to her husband, "It had been a long time since we had seen each other, so we chatted a little, but we didn't notice how the time flew by. The subway was already closed, so we had to take a cab back. Mom asked you to buy milk." Anthony saw that his wife was holding nothing but a handbag. "As if I had time to go shopping," Selena replied rudely. "Couldn't she have bought it herself?" "Mom's not feeling well. You know she has blood pressure." "Well, nothing. Do not pout at me," tried to soften the tone of the girl. "We'll do without milk today. Especially it's late. It's time to sleep." The next day, her son left on a business trip. From the morning, Angelica had a bad headache. She took a pill, tied a towel on her head to reduce the throbbing in her temples, and lay down and dozed off. After a while, Angelica woke up to a loud noise. The woman got up with difficulty, went to the kitchen. Her sister-in-law was slamming cupboard doors, dropped a pot from the stove, bent over, looking for something in the refrigerator. "What's going on?" Angelica asked. "Why are you making so much noise?" "I just lay down. My head hurts a lot, pressure apparently." "You're asking what's going on?" Selena yelled at her mother-in-law. "I woke up, I wanted to eat, and the house is empty. It's lunchtime and you haven't cooked anything yet. Are you trying to starve me to death?" "You noticed right, trying to speak quietly," said the mother-in-law. "It's lunchtime, and you, noble woman, only deign to get out of bed. I don't feel well. Cook something yourself." "So there are no products. I've already searched everything. I wanted at least fried eggs with sausage and tomatoes," resented daughter-in-law. "What did you do half a day that you could not go to the store and buy groceries?" "I told you in normal language I'm not feeling well," tried to call her daughter-in-law to compassion mother-in-law, but as if she did not hear that the woman needs help. "Why am I doing all this?" She continued to shout and swear. "My husband is not home all the time, so I still have to take care of his sick mother." "Well, no, you old hag, you won't get it from me." Selena shoved Angelica in anger. The woman's eyes blurred, she fell down, lost consciousness. The daughter-in-law was afraid she had killed her mother-in-law. She cautiously approached, bent slightly over the woman. "Angelica, are you alive?" Hearing no answer, she picked up the phone and called an ambulance. Lying in bed in the hospital room, Angelica thought back on everything that had happened to her since Anthony had brought Selena into their home. The elderly woman's life had become a nightmare. The constant swearing, the daughter-in-law complaining about her mother-in-law, the tantrums. No, this is not how she imagined her quiet old age. Angelica thought that the son would help her, and the daughter-in-law would become a second daughter, Betty. Angelica's daughter does not call, does not ask how her mother lives. She does not even know that Anthony is married to this unscrupulous girl. Soon another anniversary of John's death. Will Angelica be able to recover, to gain strength to go to the grave? There she would be able to cry, share her troubles with her husband, and maybe find the answer to her life. There was a soft knock on the ward. The door opened, and a short man with a bulging tummy entered. "May I?" he asked and went to Angelica's bed. "Angelica Dmitrievna, how is your precious health?" Harry asked in his usual Jewish manner of speaking. "Hello, dear Harry," the woman rejoiced. No one came to see her, so she was glad that she would be able not only to do what she had planned, but also to talk to her late husband's friend. The notary pulled a chair over to the woman's bed, sat down, and placed a plump leather folder on his lap. Angelica politely inquired about Harry's affairs. He shook his head, shaking his head. There were inheritances or marriage contracts. It's always a notary's job to get the paperwork right, and I suppose you've called me here on business too. "Yes, dear Harry," the woman said. "I think I'll be following John soon." "Oh, don't be silly, you blooming thing." The man waved his hands at her. "Did he call you from there?" "It's too early, too early." "So what is your business with me?" Angelica asked the man to raise the pillow higher so that she could have sit up. She was more comfortable that way. She shared the latest news with her husband's old friend. She complained about her daughter-in-law. "My son's wife is a completely unscrupulous person," Angelica said. "She needs only money and our square meters in the center of the capital. Do you understand now what kind of a snake my son has sheltered?" "I understand," replied the notary. "I suppose you want to make a will for Anthony?" "Not quite," the woman replied, surprising Harry. "I think she wants to kill me. My son is like a blind kitten, blind to everything, trusting his Selene unconditionally, and I don't feel safe. That's why I thought I'd invite you, my dear." She told of her plans. The man's eyebrows rose up in surprise, then frowned, then fell back into place. In the end, he sketched a preliminary version of the will on paper and gave it to Angelica to read. "Yes," said the woman, handing the paper back to the notary. "It's exactly what I wanted." "To tell the truth, Angelica, you managed to surprise the old Jew," Harry said, putting the paper back in the folder. "But I will do your will. Everything will be in the best possible way. Don't worry. I don't want to harm your health." The man said goodbye to Angelica, bowed politely to her roommates and left. The woman closed her eyes and tried to sleep. She was awakened by her son's voice. "Mom, how are you?" Anthony sat next to her in a chair. He took his mother's hand. I came straight to the hospital when I heard what happened to you. You can't go to all that trouble. Selena told me everything. What everything? The mother didn't understand. How you lifted a heavy pot and fell. It's good that my wife was home, called you an ambulance and went to the hospital with you. I am so grateful to her. The son stroked his mother's arm, looked at her tenderly. I brought you some fruit. I'm sorry, Selena wanted to make you something to eat, but I didn't wait, I rushed straight to you. She's so upset that no one will feed you here. Angelica listened to all this news about her son's caring wife and could not believe her ears. What a hypocrite that Selena is. She put noodles on Anthony's ears, and now she is all in chocolate. She cares about her mother-in-law like a mother. Don't worry, the food here is tolerable. Angelica tried to calm her son. Sometimes Nurse Natalie comes to me. She feeds me from a spoon. Thank her. She's a good girl who helps patients she doesn't know, Anthony said. Well, you get better. I gotta go. Selena and I were going shopping. You know, it turns out she doesn't have any decent winter clothes at all. I'll come back tomorrow. Bye, Mom. The son kissed his mother on the cheek and headed for the door, and Angelica thought with pain in her heart that her son was already the third winter in the same jacket. But he didn't think about himself. He was dressing up his young wife. The next day, Anthony didn't come to see his mother. He didn't call until the next day, late at night. Mom, how are you? He shouted into the phone, trying to shout over the sound of loud music playing. I'm sorry I didn't come to see you. It's just that it's my colleague's birthday, so we're celebrating. I could not go. I'd have hurt a good man. Will you come tomorrow, son? Angelica asked. It won't work, Mom. I'm going on a business trip to the site again tomorrow. I'm sorry. Anthony disconnected. There were short beeps in the phone. Angelica spent a month in the hospital. Gradually, her motor functions recovered. At rounds, the doctor said that she was making progress in her recovery and joked cheerfully. Soon you will run with your legs, dearie, but for now just rest and follow my recommendations. Yes, I must have run away. I must have, said Angelica sadly. Now here is not to go to the cottage, what I will do there, if I can barely move, and on the grave to her husband. And you do not give up. Hope for the best always gives a good result, soothed the woman doctor. Everything will be fine with us. On the day of discharge, Anthony arrived at the hospital. Before going up to his mother's room, he went to see her doctor. Tell me, doctor, can Mom recover completely? The doctor noticed that the guy is worried about his mother. Absolutely. Don't even doubt it, the doctor replied. We have treated her well. Now it's up to you. What do you mean? It's up to us. Anthony didn't understand. Angelica needs care, rest, and massage. Of course, good nutrition. It is very important. Because the patient's body is weakened, the doctor gave some more recommendations on how to take care of the patient, signed some papers, and allowed Anthony to take his mother home. His son brought her to the exit from the hospital in a wheelchair, and further to the car they walked in small steps, taking short breaks so that Angelica could rest. The boy realized that it would be difficult to get home with his sick mother by public transport, so he called a cab. Looking at how his mother could barely move her legs, he thought, it's good that the house has an elevator, otherwise, how would we with her up the stairs? At home, he helped her undress and put her to bed. You rest, and I'll make something to eat, Anthony said. I bought a bag of dumplings. All that's left is to boil them. Where's your wife, son? Angelica asked. She went to a friend. They are planning where to go on vacation for the new year. Heard the voice of the son, who went to the kitchen to cook himself, and his mother bought dumplings. Angelica noted with annoyance that her daughter-in-law did not care about her son at all. She has only entertainment on her mind, which requires serious expenses. When the woman entered the apartment, she noticed that the house was not tidy. Things were lying on the floor, and in the hallway stood an unpacked suitcase of her son, which she took on a business trip. The mother felt bad for Anthony, but she also felt bad for herself that she hadn't been able to persuade him to marry that slut when he first brought her into their home. She should have insisted, should have opened Anthony's eyes that this young woman would not make him happy. That's where she lurks when a sick mother-in-law and a hungry son need help. Anthony returned to his mother's bedroom with a plate of hot dumplings. He helped the woman sit up in bed, adjusted the pillow. The son took care of his mother as best he could. It was clumsy, the dumplings were boiled, and the piece of bread he had brought was obviously not fresh. Angelica was worried that she could not yet go into the kitchen, knead the dough with the former ease. Bake Anthony's favorite cherry pie. It's delicious, she said, pushing the plate away. You've only had 3 dumplings. Let's have some more. Anthony encouraged her with his cooking skills. No, Angelica refused. I've had enough. I'm full. She told her son once again that the food was very good, so as not to upset him. The woman saw that he was already concerned about the absence of his wife and did not want to aggravate the situation. She needed peace to get well. And as soon as she recovered, she would restore order in the apartment and in the life of her beloved son. Through her sleep, she heard Celine return. She was loudly telling Anthony that she and her friend had chosen a boarding house outside the city, where there was a huge list of spa procedures. They should definitely go there for New Year's Eve. Anthony asked her to speak quietly because her mother was sleeping in the bedroom, but she didn't care. She continued gibbering without lowering the tone of her voice. Would your mother give us money for the trip? She asked her husband. Anthony was confused. Before leaving on the business trip, he had brought Salim a 6-month salary and bonuses. Had the money run out so quickly? Do you think I'm eating air while you're traveling around your facilities? How did the girl and your mother to go to the hospital to feed? I had to do what? Buy groceries, fruit, vitamins. If it wasn't for me, she would have been in the hospital for months. Calm down, Anthony told her. I just thought we have enough money for the party and the groceries, and we could put it aside. I didn't think I'd marry a man who would count every cent I spent and make me account for it. Selena took offense at her husband. Well, all right, Anthony tried to hug her. I'll try to think of something so that you and your friend can go to your spa treatments. What's the date of the trip? January 11, Selena answered. She was already smiling and kissing her husband. Anthony was thinking, calculating something. I'm sorry, darling, he said. On the 11th, I'm going on a business trip for a week. So what? Continuing to purr in the ear of her spouse, Selena asked, My friend and I are going without you. It is understandable, but with whom will stay Mom? She needs care and supervision, said Anthony. Selena got really angry. Now Angelica didn't even have to listen to hear her daughter-in-law's every word from her bedroom. What is this? She shouted. No sooner had I gotten married, and they've already given me an invalid. I wasn't hired to be a caregiver. I dreamed of a happy life with you and me, and what did I get? Endless days with an elderly mother-in-law. How can you talk about my mother like that? Anthony said indignantly. We can wait a little longer. She'll get better, and we can go wherever we want. You must realize that you can't leave her alone. So get a nurse or a nurse. Selena kept shouting. Darling, I have no more money. I gave you everything, and you, apparently, have already spent my salary and bonuses. Oh, you're also scolding me with every cent. Selena took quick steps towards her and her husband's room. That's it. I'm done. I'm packing up and going to my parents. They've never denied me anything. Anthony rushed to stop her. He promised that she would definitely go, but a little later, and he would find the money. Realizing that at home in her small town, a gray, joyless life without beautiful things and entertainment awaited the girl, Selena gradually calmed down and began to arrange the things she had already managed to throw in the suitcase, back on the shelves in the closet. Mammy, good morning, greeted Angelica Anthony, entering her room. I'd overslept, Selena, and I went to bed late last night. I'm in a hurry to get to work. Selena will feed you, and then the masseuse will come in the afternoon. Okay, son, the woman replied. The daughter-in-law was in no hurry to feed her mother-in-law breakfast. She turned on loud music, took a long shower. Having cleaned herself up, Selena went to the kitchen. She decided not to anger her husband. She saw that his nerves are already at the limit, and there was no time to quarrel. Selena saw in the jewelry catalog charming gold earrings with sapphires and really wanted to get them for the new year. Anthony had asked to feed his mother, so she was going to make something. The girl looked around the kitchen, opened the door of the overhead cabinet. It was almost completely empty. Selena found half a bag of buckwheat groats. Great, I'll make her buckwheat porridge, and then I'll go down to the cafe and have breakfast there myself, she thought. The girl took milk out of the refrigerator and poured it into a pot. At the same moment, she smelled a disgusting sour odor. The milk was spoiled. After a little hesitation, Selena made a decision. She'll eat it. Nothing will happen to her mother-in-law. She opened the window to let the smell of sour milk escape, boiled some porridge, put a few spoonfuls of buckwheat in a bowl, and went to Angelica's room. How was your mood? Asked her sister-in-law, putting a friendly smile on her face. Good, The mother-in-law replied quietly. And I've made you breakfast, Selena continued to say, smiling. She handed Angelica a plate and a spoon. The woman ate a couple of spoonfuls as suddenly she got muddy, vomited and flowed on the pillow, stained the sheet and blanket. What is this? Indignantly shouted at her mother-in-law. Girl, how long will you make fun of me? Now I'll have to clean it all up. The food is spoiled, Selena. The porridge is sour. Coming to her senses, Angelica said. Nothing is not spoiled. The daughter-in-law tried to keep herself in control. She decided not to quarrel with her mother-in-law, so that she, seeing how Selena takes care of her, gave money. Let's get this all cleaned up now. Selena helped the woman up, sitting her down on the bed. She pulled a clean set of linens from the closet, made the bed neatly, took the dirty one into the bathroom. When she returned, Selena changed Angelica's nightgown and tucked her back into bed. The girl sat down next to her. I guess you're right. The porridge did smell strange, Selena began to say in an angelic voice. I'm sorry, I didn't see it coming. Are you feeling better? Angelica was surprised at the change in her daughter-in-law's behavior and voice. Better, don't worry, she replied. If you want, I'll bring you hot donuts from the coffee shop. The girl jumped up, showing readiness to run for a treat for her mother-in-law. Unexpectedly, Angelica smiled at her daughter-in-law's behavior. I do, she said, and I also want to drink sweet tea with you together. Hurry back. I'll be right back, shouted the daughter-in-law from somewhere in the corridor. Selin and Blake stretched for an hour, although the coffee shop she mentioned was on the corner of their house. But Angelica waited patiently for the promised donuts and tea. When her sister-in-law returned, the woman was reading a book. Selena pushed the coffee table over to the bed, brought cups and a hot teapot, and placed the sweets on a plate. Here, she said solemnly, pleased with herself, I bought donuts and eclairs. Help yourselves. Selena looked like she was in a good mood and was not going to quarrel with her mother-in-law. The daughter-in-law helped her mother-in-law to rise, gave her a cup of tea. The girl herself sat down next to her on a chair. To Angelica's surprise, they had a pleasant conversation. Selena seemed to have been replaced. She was smiling, friendly, not trying to offend or insult her mother-in-law. I never asked how you met my Anthony, my mother-in-law asked. Can you tell me? Sure. It's a very funny story, began the daughter-in-law. I was waiting for a guy from our group. We were friends. His name was Frederick, and he was supposed to bring me some notes. I saw him standing there, wearing a white sweater with reindeer on it. I crept up quietly and covered his eyes with my palms from behind. He turned around, and then I see that in front of me stands a complete stranger guy, very handsome with kind eyes. And he was smiling, not understanding what kind of girl so suddenly jumped up to him. So we met. Mother-in-law and daughter-in-law laughed at the ridiculous situation. They had fun. Selena turned out to be not a bad girl at all, Angelica thought. Perhaps what they had had before was just the usual melding of generations who had to exist in the same space, share their household, and put up with their habits. Suddenly, Angelica thought about it and said, I was introduced to my late husband by my father. They were colleagues. John looked after me for a long time, but when my parents died, he married me immediately to protect and care for me. He treated me like a precious Chinese porcelain vase all my life, never hurt me in word or deed. Oh, Selena, I miss him so much. And how worried I am that I won't be able to come to his grave on the anniversary of his death. Selena too sat with a pensive look, but there were completely different thoughts in her mind. Why can't you? She asked her mother-in-law. Why, I can hardly move around the house, and here I have to go to the cemetery by train, then walk for a long time. It's unthinkable. But you will feel guilty for not having been to the grave, said Selena sympathetically, and you cannot be nervous and worried now. You need positive emotions and peace of mind to recover. Let me take you to the cemetery. The proposal of her sister-in-law was unexpected for Angelica, but pleasant. How will you take me? Because you don't have a car, and on the train you'll make a mess with me, asked her mother-in-law. I have a good friend from college, so I'll ask him. We used to be friends. He will not refuse me, assured Angelica. Thank you. The mother-in-law took her daughter-in-law's hand and stroked her dry palm gratefully. Celine basked in Frederick's arms. He was a great lover, not like her Anthony. Except that he didn't work anywhere, spent a lot of time in bars and clubs, constantly asking her friend for money. Sometimes, when the girl's husband was on business trips, Selena went to have fun with Frederick. She herself paid all the bills in the club, and he paid her with caresses and sex, from which the girl was breathtaking. You should have known what it took for me to put up with that hag's talk. And when I made her bed, I almost ran to the toilet myself. Can you imagine? That old gal pooped on the bed too, disgusting woman. And you bear with it, advised her lover, pressing her to his chest. And no matter what hour, your husband will kick you out of the house, you will be left without a luxurious apartment and without money. What will we have fun with then? I tried, but it's so unbearable, whimpered the girl, pulling the sheet over her bare breasts. The young man took from the bedside table cigarettes, lit up right in bed. I have a plan to get rid of the old woman, Selena said. A plan? What kind of plan? The boy asked without looking at her. Under the guise of a trip to the cemetery, you and I will take my mother-in-law to a remote forest and leave her there. She will either freeze or she will be torn apart by wolves. No one will know anything. There's never any people there. No one will help her. Isn't that too cruel? The boy hesitated. A human being, after all, and an elderly and handicapped person. And sit without money every day to change the bed and feed the hated mother-in-law is not cruel, do you think? Selena had to convince Frederick to help her. Yes, without money, of course, it's bad, confirmed the guy. There, feeling the power of persuasion, Selena said, my mother-in-law has an account left to her by her late husband. Apparently, there's a lot of money in there. From that account, she gave us money for the wedding and the wedding trip. If she's gone, I can manage that money. My hubby can't refuse me anything, believe me. Are you sure it will work out? Frederick asked. Do not even doubt, I did everything right. Now mother-in-law thinks that I penetrated to her kindness of heart, began to trust me. Oh, you are my Fox Patrikivna, laughed the guy and hid with his head under the sheet. Your mom is very worried about not being able to go to your father's grave on the anniversary, Selena said to Anthony at dinner. Yes, you could hire a cab, but I'll just have to leave on a business trip, the guy said sadly. When I get back, I'll definitely take her. But this date is so important to her, she's so upset, and it could be bad for her health. I see you've made up, Anthony said approvingly. Mommy praises you so much, I'm glad. Anthony, maybe I'll take her. I'm very sorry to see her worry. She told me how much your father loved her, Anthony's wife suddenly suggested. How do you envision it? He asked. We don't have a car. I'll ask one of my college friends, or at least I'll call a cab. You'll leave money for your mom and me, right? Selena hugged him from behind by the shoulders, kissing the back of his neck tenderly. The boy's breathing became heavy, intermittent. Of course I will, he said, taking Selena in his arms and carrying her into the bedroom. How I love you, my darling. The next morning, Selena saw her husband off on a business trip, made tea and sandwiches, took yogurt out of the refrigerator and headed to her mother-in-law's room. Good morning, she greeted Angelica as she opened the door. How are you feeling? Ready for your trip? You know, Selena, it's like my whole soul is excited. I just can't wait to visit the grave of John, my beloved late husband. Thank you for doing this for me. You are a very kind girl with a warm heart. Don't praise, or I'll get proud, the daughter-in-law said in a joking tone and placed a tray of tea, sandwiches and yogurt in front of the woman. Now you need to be well nourished. It's a long journey and you'll need your strength. So let's have a good breakfast. Angelica obediently ate the yogurt and sandwich, drank all the tea. Hand me my makeup bag from the dressing table. I want to tidy up. When John was alive, I never allowed myself to show up in front of him without makeup and in a housecoat. And this time, I have to look good. I'll tell him about you too, that you take care of me like my own mother. The daughter-in-law gave her mother-in-law a cosmetic bag and a mirror, then brought a comb and helped to arrange her gray hair. Let her look beautiful on the day she dies, Selena thought. She didn't feel the slightest bit sorry for the older woman. Angelique's sister-in-law was only thinking that if she didn't have the money, Frederick might find another girl and she wouldn't be able to live without him. Selena's cell phone rang. The girl answered it. Yes, we are ready. We will be downstairs in 15 minutes. Wait, with a smile she turned to Angelica. Well, your carriage is here, as I promised. Let's get ready. The daughter-in-law helped her mother-in-law to dress. They slowly left the apartment, went down the elevator. Frederick's blue foreign car was parked in the driveway. The guy got out of the car, obligingly opened the door. This is Frederick. Angelica, meet. Selena introduced the young man to her mother-in-law. He and I went to college together. By the way, Anthony knows him too. Selena deliberately lied so Angelica wouldn't worry. Since the boys knew each other, everything would be fine. That was the plan of the conniving sister-in-law. They drove out of town, not driving fast. Angelica knew this road very well. It was the same road she used to go to her dacha, which was a little away. If we turn right at this fork, we will get to our dacha, the woman said. Next time, said the daughter-in-law from the front seat. It seemed to the woman that her voice became steely, somehow cold. But she quickly got rid of the unpleasant feeling of approaching danger and enjoyed the winter landscape. The road to the cemetery passed near the territory of a huge protected forest. Angelica remembered how she and her late husband had often traveled here for mushrooms. The woman never went far from John because she knew from childhood that this forest was home to wild animals. Everywhere you could see traces of wild boars, elks, wolves in the forest. Suddenly, Frederick turned off the road towards the reserve. Why did we turn off? Angelica got worried. We should go straight ahead. Because we're not going to the cemetery today, Selena said angrily, not even turning around. We have another excursion planned for today. I don't understand anything, Selena. Where are you taking me? The woman was scared out of her wits. To the forest, dear mother-in-law, answered the daughter-in-law. I'll finally get rid of you, you old hag. I've had enough of you. Sitting on a bag of money and every cent I have to pull out of you. Now I can use the money from your husband's account any way I want, and Anthony won't say a word to me. Angelica felt her hands and feet grow cold, even though the car was warm. She shivered, pulled on her mittens. Now we'll take you further into the woods and leave you there. You'll never get home. And the wolves will do their work. Don't worry, the cemetery where your husband is buried is close by. You'll rot in the damp earth nearby. Angelica cried. Selena, take me home. I'll give you all the money and I'll go to the cottage myself. I'll never disturb you and Anthony. I don't want your Anthony. Frederick and I have long loved each other, and Anthony I needed to stay in the capital and to live comfortably. Frederick stopped the car. There was no farther to go. They dragged the old woman out, took her by her arms and legs, dragged her into the woods, drowning in snow. When the deed was done, Angelica's sister-in-law and her lover returned to the car. They drove in silence along the road. Suddenly Selena said, pointing with her hand towards the receding forest, Well, here come our helpers. They will do their job. Frederick looked in the direction of Selena's hand. At the edge of the forest stood a pack of wolves. How much time had passed, Angelica did not know. She woke up in a snowdrift. There were only tall fir trees around. It was pointless to call for help. Praying to God to give her strength to get out of this forest, the woman crawled through the snow. It was getting dark in the forest. She lost consciousness from fear and cold, and woke up at dawn and crawled again, not knowing that she would ever be able to get out. Almost completely exhausted woman suddenly saw that the forest began to thin. In the distance appeared a gap. She gathered all her remaining strength, crawled into the light of the rays penetrating through the thicket, and then lost consciousness again. When she woke up, Angelica saw crosses and monuments in front of her. This was the cemetery where her husband John was laid to rest. I will not survive, so at least I will die on the grave of my beloved husband, thought the woman, and crawled again. She was able to find the monument with John's picture on it. She lay down next to it. The woman felt nothing, her body as if it didn't belong to her. My darling, I'm coming to you. Wait, I'm coming soon. We'll be together again. Angelica whispered with icy lips, and only one tear rolled out of her eyes, which instantly froze on her cheek, turning into a small ice flake. Mom? Suddenly the woman heard a voice. It came from far away. Mommy, what's wrong with you? Why are you here? Why are you alone? Oh my God, are you alive? Angelica opened her eyes with difficulty. She saw Beatty's blurry, frightened expression. Is Beatty in heaven too? Angelica thought. Her daughter tried to lift her mother up, but the woman was falling back into the snow. Then Beatty grabbed her by the hood of her coat and dragged her straight through the snow past the monuments to the road. The cab driver was waiting for Beatty at the cemetery gate. He saw his passenger dragging a half-dead woman across the ground, jumped out of the car, ran toward her. What happened? He shouted. Who is it? Help me, please, asked Betty. It's my mom. I found her on my father's grave. The two of them struggled to get the half-dead woman into the car. Drive fast as you can to the hospital, Beatty asked the driver. the man was speeding down the road. A man's life depended on how fast he was going now. As he pulled onto the country highway from the country road, he increased his speed. And at the entrance to the city, he didn't notice the traffic police car and the officer who ordered him to stop on the side of the road. Shit, the driver swore. Together with Betty, they jumped out of the car, ran up to the policeman, began to explain confusedly that they were taking to the hospital a sick, frostbitten woman they had found in the cemetery. It took a few minutes for the police to realize that the way the old woman was treated would determine whether she would live. At the sound of the siren of the police car escorting the car with Angelica, the cab flew into the hospital courtyard. Anthony was returning from his business trip in a good, happy mood. He already imagined how his beloved wife and mother were waiting for him at home, and he bought various goodies. They would surely drink tea together and share the news. Coming out of the elevator, he was surprised to find that the door of their apartment was ajar. "Selena, why is the door open?" her husband asked, entering the hallway. To his surprise, he saw that there were some strangers in police uniforms sitting in the hall, and Beatty's sister was talking to them. "What's going on?" the boy asked. "Beatty, how did you end up here?" "And who are you?" the policeman asked Anthony. "I live here." "Confused guy, with my mother and wife." "We'll figure it out. Have a seat." The policeman pointed to the couch. Not understanding anything, Anthony sat down and stared at the officer. Having handed over the exhausted, frostbitten mother to the doctors, Betty turned to the policeman, asked what she should do. They offered to give her a ride to the station. "There you will tell everything." The investigator listened to Betty. On the anniversary of her father's death, she went to visit his grave, where she found her mother lying in the snow with her cheek pressed against the photo of her husband. How she had gotten there, Betty didn't know. The investigator asked his subordinates to find out what cars were recorded on CCTV cameras on the way to the cemetery. It turned out that only one car passed by. Its license plates were run through the database. The owner turned out to be one Frederick Novikov. An outfit was sent to the guy's address. Frightened, Frederick told everything, asked to take into account that to drive into the forest and leave there an old woman to be eaten by wolves was the idea of his mistress Selena, and he only drove the car in the direction indicated. Frederick and Selena were arrested, and after the trial were sent to prison to serve time for attempting to kill a man. Angelica was in intensive care for a long time. Doctors fought for her life. When she woke up, she saw in front of her the nurse Natalie, who took care of the woman when she was in the same hospital. The other day, Natalie was called to the notary's office. A fabulous sum, bequeathed by a grateful patient, had fallen into her account.
Thank you for watching this video to the end. Subscribe to the channel. Like it, write comments if you like the story, and see you on the channel.